And then since then, you've been on Joe Rogan, you've been on Flagrant. What other podcasts have you been on?
There have been a few. I think those were mostly the big in studio ones.
Yeah.
Was Rogan and Andrew Schultz's Flagrant, which was hilarious actually. That was a lot of fun. And I was on Rogan with Jimmy. That was a great opportunity. I enjoyed that, although it's a bit of a blur in my head at this point. But I've been on a few others, just on like Zoom and the remote style ones. So yeah, but you were the first guy the first in studio podcast. So.
Well, cool, man. I'm happy to inspire those guys to discover you. I mean, I'm sure they already. I know Rogan already knew about you. He'd already seen videos of your stuff.
I think so. Yeah.
But you've been all over the place too. You just got back from Turkey, I think, recently.
England, Turkey earlier this year, and then England. I came back from England a couple of weeks back. First chance to visit sort of the megalithic structures there, the stone circles, the museums, things like that. You could spend months in the British Isles. There's so much to see there. I definitely want to go back.
Yeah.
But Turkey earlier in the year.
So what were you doing in Turkey? Where'd you go? You went to Göbekli Tepe?
We did. So we did. I did a couple of weeks in southeastern Turkey. So in that Göbekli Tepe region, it's all centered around the city of Şanlıurfa, which is the biblical Edessa. It's the city of prophets. It's a city that goes back thousands of years. I mean, there's been occupation there since Neolithic times. It's a really interesting city. It's sort of Abrahamic traditions there. A lot of the legends from books of the faith that now are like Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. A lot of the events that happen in those religions are all centered in that area. It's it was part of like the Silk Road, the northern-ish end of what was Mesopotamia back in the day. So it's an ancient place. Really interesting city, a lot of fun. I wasn't sure what to expect. It was my first time in Turkey, and different to Egypt, I'd say. It was a really nice place, and the timing was. I don't know what happens with me in travel, man. Trying to even get over here, we had we had the hurricane. But man, I have the worst luck with travel because they had the earthquakes earlier in this year. Those big earthquakes that they shook down
a lot of people.
Like at least, I think the government estimates, they said something like 50,000 people. The guys that I knew on the ground there who were out, like my guy there, Ramazan, who we did the tour with, lost his home. Like his home fell down. He was living out of his car, but within the next day or two, he was out helping in the villages, trying to help people to sort of recover from it. But he said it was probably more like 250,000 people that might have died in that, just from, if you include Syria, because it's right next to the Syrian border, and there was a lot of Syria that was affected as well. But yeah, so that happened, and they're like, man, so the city itself of Şanlıurfa wasn't, the infrastructure was still up, the roads were okay, a few buildings fell down. Some of the other cities were impacted much more. And then they had these rains, they had these floods, which were almost unprecedented floods in that region. It just poured down, and there were people that died in Şanlıurfa purely because they didn't have anywhere to live, and they were in these tents, and they got sort of washed into these alcoves and carried away in these floods, and a bunch of people died. So I was like, man, and all this happened within the couple of weeks, and I guess around the month leading up to it. So we were like, geez, are we going to do it? And he was like, yeah, we can do it. And we sort of reassured the people that were coming with us, we can make it happen, and we did. Unfortunately, obviously places like the museum, they have this wonderful museum in Şanlıurfa where a lot of the artifacts from Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, like all of the recent archaeological finds there are housed in this museum, but they had to evacuate it because of the floods. They basically boxed up, I don't know, like 100,000 artifacts or something and shipped them off, so we couldn't get into the museum. But also as a consequence, it did make the place green. Like normally if you see pictures of that region, it's brown, but we were there, it was just breathtakingly beautiful. Like these limestone hills were just breaking out in wildflowers and grass, and everywhere we went it was just gorgeous. And of course the sites there are just incredible. They go back forever. There's Göbekli Tepe, which was, everyone I think who is interested in this field should know something about Göbekli Tepe. It's the site that was, it was originally discovered in the 1950s, I think. There were some farmers, or they saw the tops of what it turned out to be these big T-pillars sticking out of the ground on this side of a hill. I think it translates to pot-bellied hill in that language, and they sort of dismissed it as being, they thought, well, no, this is a relatively modern cemetery or something. Like it's not it's not, the stonework was too good to be considered very ancient. And it wasn't until the mid-1990s when the German Archaeological Institute and Klaus Schmidt, who sadly has passed away since then, began to excavate at Göbekli Tepe. And that's when they found, okay, yeah, so this is actually tremendously ancient. It does have some very unique stonework, including megalithic work. You've got, T-pillars that are 18 feet tall and 20 plus tons. And it's a very large site. It's all of these stone circles, these pillars that are encompassed by more of a loose or a rough stone walls, and it spreads out. It's quite large. There's a number of them. They only excavated maybe 10% of that site. And it shook the world up because they based on some of the material that they found in that dig, they pretty much conclusively dated that thing to about 11,000 years old, which is much older than any previously recorded, evidence of civilization or of this type of occupation. So going there was a really interesting experience. People have said for a long time that it was deliberately buried. The work and the research and the science on this is slowly changing. They're starting to move away from this idea that it was deliberately buried. It may just have been layers of sediment that have built up over time. There might have been some periods of burying. In fact, if you tried to bury it deliberately, it would have taken years and years and years. It's a huge site. But what was interesting to me, researching this site, is that if you look at the picture of it, this is a good picture of it. I have some photos too, but this works. Is that you have two styles of architecture here. You have the megalithic work, the T-pillars, and it's not just the pillars here. They would actually cut down to the bedrock. You see that area around the T-pillars? It's when you go there, it looks like cement. It's not cement. It's actually I believe, limestone bedrock that they've lapped down to be flat. So they have these huge, big, flat areas, and they inset these stones into them, or some of them are set up on pedestals like that central one. And these T-pillars are, a lot of them, they're not all complete. They're some of them are broken. They have the most amazing high relief artwork on them. By that, it means you're carving away the negative space to make the figures and the symbols pop out at you. Like
Right.
Yeah. And and that's a good example of that image there of that one stone. Yeah, if you look at that, so you see how the walls around it kind of encompass those stones, like they actually cover up some of the features, and you can clearly tell the walls seem like they've been built to reinforce these stone circles, to sort of preserve them almost. And looking at the walls, and this is also true at another site we'll talk about, Karahan Tepe, inside the walls, there's actually pieces of broken pillars have been used as material in the building of the walls. And the material, or the organic matter that they've used to date the site to give it that 11,000-year-old age came from inside these walls. So it's like, to me, I look at that, it's two different architectural styles. I think it is potentially indicative of two entirely different periods of occupation and building, because these walls are quite primitive. It's local stone, and they're actually using pieces of broken pillars, which means that those pillars could have been there for who knows how long, actually fallen over. Some of them might have broken, and they've been encompassed and used in these walls that were then used to sort of resurrect or renew or renovate the site and protect these pillars. So do we know if it's 11,000-year-old? I think that's kind of the earliest date for it, the youngest date. It could be vastly older than that. We really don't know.
Yeah, it was your thanks,
And you
man.
said there's a bunch of this that's still
What
under
up,
the ground.
Heaps of it,
Baron?
yeah. So
I'm gonna
they've kind of excavated on one side of a...
try to keep the
of a
slideshow going
hill,
of all my
and that's
AI
where the
art.
UNESCO, like the World Heritage Site is now. They've put a big cover over the top of it. It's actually great.
There we go.
See the
That's
walkway
pretty
there.
good.
There's this big...
What's
They
up,
want to keep the
broski?
rain
How
off
are
it.
you,
I think
man?
when it does rain, if they left it out in the weather, it'd just get really muddy, and it'd just wash away a lot of the sediment. It's a great way to view the site. It'd be lovely to get down in there.
Thing
but
is that it doesn't
they
have
get
the
a lot of
details,
traffic. Like, this has
man, you know
become
what I
a major
mean?
tourist attraction
Oh, wow.
for that part of Turkey now. A lot of people want to see this, and they've built a big visitor center, and so it's a nice way to view the site. And if you have a camera with a zoom lens, you can kind of see a lot of the detail.
Oh, wow, that's incredible, that negative relief.
Yeah, the high relief. And there's lots of interesting studies that have been done on Göbekli Tepe. Martin Sweatman, who I've talked about, he was presenting at the Cosmic Summit recently as well. I've talked with him on my channel. He wrote a book called Prehistory Decoded, And he contends that Göbekli Tepe is something of a celestial calendar. He
That's
uses
the
a
one.
method of statistical analysis that shows
That's the
that
one, the big
it's
one.
extremely likely that's
You can just
what it
make
is.
up.
He's looking at.
You can make.
the
You need to
figures
make an
relating
account,
to,
but you don't need to verify the
precession
account.
and constellations in the
So you
sky,
could just
and that it
make an account
when,
and just
when looked at
never
through his
log off.
analysis, it seems to mark interesting events that we know sort of happened, like periods like the Younger Dryas, because this site dates back to the Younger Dryas, and had there been this comet or these impacts or these fragments of things coming from the sky, that's probably something they would have noticed. He wrote a whole book on this. It's a very interesting theory. He gets attacked pretty hard on the basis of it, I think, from a lot of people that don't really understand the nature of statistics and how that works. He actually wrote there's a peer-reviewed paper that you can read if you're interested in kind of diving into his research or his detail.
It's too
There's
much,
other
man.
studies that have been
It's
done
too
also
much.
that are interesting
AI
on
is
the
just,
geometry
it's
of
so
the
funny.
site. So
Look at
there's
that.
not only do you have you have these
Oh
stone
wait, this has
circles,
a
which
filter.
the circles themselves, and this is true also at Karahan Tepe, have interesting alignment. So they
There we
align to,
go.
a lot of
Yeah.
them may well have been used as
There you go.
solar observatories or potentially lunar observatories.
That's better.
So there's alignments on the site that point to.
I think I have like
significant periods,
300 or
solstices,
something. 300 images to
equinoxes,
save.
lunar events. But there's,
So, I mean,
there's
if
actually
you might-
a geometric arrangement between the circles
might see
themselves at Göbekli Tepe. So they
You
form
might see repeats,
like equilateral
but
triangles, I
we're doing
think.
pretty
There's been some studies done that shows that there was a very deliberate layout planned of how these stone circles were formed. So it was fascinating, and not, so Göbekli Tepe was obviously a highlight, but what I didn't know on this trip was the fact that, okay, I knew about Karahan Tepe, so that's another site that's nearby. It's actually pretty close.
Morrowind, dude. Some of the prompts I
there
used
was a
were
site that was
Morrowind
very recently
style.
discovered. It's an active archaeological site now. I believe the University of Istanbul is excavating there.
Gundam Wing.
It's another stone circle site. It's similar architecture to Göbekli Tepe. You have huge
What
T
else?
pillars, but it's something like 10 times
I got some
larger
pretty funny
than
ones, man. I did some
Göbekli
like
Tepe.
Rembrandt
And they've
style
only
shit.
just
I
sort
did
of
some like
scratched the surface
Picasso
of it.
style.
They're
Maybe
still
it'll come up.
digging, and we had special
Dude,
permission
like
to go
the AI,
in there
it's so sick,
and
man.
look around the site, and you can literally look at these beautiful hills with flowers on them, and just poking up everywhere are the tops of T pillars. You just see this tiny little top of it, and you can clearly see it's a T pillar, and there's something buried under here, and there might be as many as 1,000 T pillars on this site. It's at least 5 times or more, I think, larger than Göbekli Tepe, and it's at least 500 years older based on the dating of material that they've found so far. Which, it's kind of funny because when they built the visitor center at Göbekli Tepe, they called it like the 0 point in history. This was the brand name that it gave you. You go in these big light shows and these big wall-to-wall sort of cinematic experiences to look at the site, but it's like, well, I guess that makes Karahan Tepe 0 point minus 500 or something like this, right? Right, it's even older. And I actually was out there like 3-4 times during the 2 weeks. It's a wonderful site. I could probably even pull up images if we want to see them, but it's, they're just starting to excavate. And you see a similar thing. In fact, at Karahan, there's evidence of domiciles. So one of the controversies about Göbekli Tepe is this civilization, right? Because technically, if you go look at, and I guess this is more along the orthodox line of thinking, the date for civilization hasn't really changed. We're still saying, well, 6,000 years ago, Sumerians and Mesopotamia, that was the start. But when I look at a place like Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe, that screams civilization to me. The theory is, it's purely ceremonial. It was what happened, and this sort of came out with the Michael Shermer,
Nice, dude.
Graham Hancock, and
I
Randall
want to do an
Carlson,
AI stream, man, but the thing
podcast
is,
on JRE.
you only have so
well-known
many
one.
credits per day or whatever.
I mean,
right?
they've essentially just changed the definition of
I would
hunter-gatherers
love
to
to
be,
just
well,
do
no,
it,
this
sit
is
down,
not
do
just
an
limited
AI
to
stream, because
hunter-
like I'm literally just
hunter-gathering,
doing that
but on the
anyways
weekends, I guess,
offline. I
when
might
the
as well
men
just
wanna get
do it
away from the women
online.
and the kids or something, they like to participate in a little bit of megalithic stone building and things like this, and building these
Yeah,
20-ton
yeah, that's true. Or
T-pillars.
different
It's
browsers.
insane. But there's infrastructure on these sites. They're
Oh,
massive.
man,
There's
it's too funny,
systems.
man.
There's
Oh yeah, the
quarries,
UPS. I did
there are other
UPS driver
structures
passing away
at
for
Karahan
$22
Tepe,
an hour.
There's actually evidence for domiciles and permanent housing, which is another indication of sort of settlement and
I'm
civilization.
sorry, I'm not laughing
And
at the guy
I just
passing away. I'm just
look
laughing
at the
clown wheels.
scale and scope of what is on these sites, and it's like that's not something you do on the side. Like this requires specialization, right? So for people to be able to specialize in doing this type of stonework, this type of
Yeah,
a logistical
I
endeavor,
do.
the
Yeah, I
artwork
know.
that's required.
They don't let you
to
do
carve
any
these things. You need to have
really famous
infrastructure
public.
around
Yeah,
you.
it
That means
is.
there's other people collecting
They
food,
never
there's
really
other
let you do
people
Trump
doing things.
before.
Like it's that organization that essentially defines
So all the weed,
civilization.
like all these are pretty
I think
hot.
just the scale and scope of the work requires that.
my
So it's, I
friggin'
think
AI
it's kind of ridiculous that we don't consider this civilization.
is the pre.
And the nail in the coffin
Cuckening.
for me, and this is something I
The
learned
pre,
on that trip,
not
is that it's
cuckening,
not
but the
only is there
pre,
Karahan and Göbekli Tepe, but there's
Making it
between
shitty.
40 and 80 more sites that they've discovered just like that.
Around that area.
Around that area in southeastern Turkey, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other well-known
Nothing to
sites,
do with it.
Sogmatar and other
Of course.
places, but these tepes and these T-pillared stone circles, they're doing a lot of
Yeah.
ground penetrating radar and that type of thing, and they discovered
Maybe.
somewhere
Trump,
between
I don't
40
know.
and 80, and
I think they
wanna
always
open up
block
like 15
Trump.
of them for tourism.
And
And that's
like
like
Biden. I
at
tried
that
doing the
point,
Rock.
you know,
It wouldn't even
it's
let
a
do
huge
the
civil-
Rock.
That's a
So dumb.
It requires a big population of people, and it's civilization. I mean, it's like a lost chapter of human civilization that we really know nothing about. Like we've got some artifacts and we've got some indication, but it's a yeah. I mean, it's to me, it's just a whole lost chapter of our history in this region.
Who are the organizations involved in doing some of this ground penetrating radar and like discovering more of these sites?
Well, a lot of it is happening locally with the universities in Turkey.
Oh, okay.
Istanbul, I mean, they're excavating, I believe it's the University of Istanbul is excavating at Karahan. Who was doing
You know what I'm
Göbekli?
gonna do? I
The
think I might
German
make it bigger, my
Archaeological
friends.
Institute
Honestly,
was
might do
the
that.
one working at Göbekli Tepe. It's,
I just want to
you know, the
check it out.
way these projects get dealt out and the way that digs happen and sort of institutions get involved is there's no regular process. It's like a negotiation process. I assume it's, you know, some academic institution somewhere in the world wants to go and dig somewhere, and it's a negotiation with the government to get the permissions, and then they kind of get to run the site. And then at places like Göbekli Tepe, when UNESCO gets involved, that's a whole other set of things. You see the same thing in Egypt. Like there's various, you have the British in one area, you have, you know, the French in another area, you have the Germans in another area, you have the Egyptians themselves doing a lot of work in different areas. So it's a case-by-case basis almost about who actually
Oh my God, you're not
does
gonna
the
be able to
work
read this at
and
all, are you?
publishes. Certainly in Egypt, any publishing of findings has to be done in close concert with the Department of Antiquities, formerly the Supreme Council of Antiquities. So they essentially control the release of information. So people that have seen things like the recent, you know, Scan Pyramids project and that sort of data, when they found that new chamber in the Great Pyramid and stuck like a little camera in there to take a look, that was all released by the Department of Antiquities in Egypt, in partnership with the people that were actually doing the work.
When did they find a new chamber in the Great Pyramid?
Oh, you haven't? Well, it's been going on for a couple of years
Oh,
now.
I know where I'll
So
put it,
there's
maybe.
been the Scan Pyramids project is what it's called. They're essentially
Pretty
using
shit.
muon cosmology, or it's basically cosmic
shit.
ray detection. So they put all these sensors, and I've seen them a bunch of times because I've been into the pyramid over this period of time several times. And down in the subterranean chamber, there's like a rack full of gear, and there's these boxes up on the Grand Gallery and in the Queen's Chamber,
I
like
may
the
regret
parts that you
doing
can't
this.
normally get to, the average tourist won't be able to get to. You need
Right.
to like book a special permission to see. There's a lot of this
I might be
infrastructure,
okay.
and so what they're doing is there's
So
these
it's on one-
cosmic rays and
one-
muons in this case
Might be okay.
are passing through. They pass through material, they pass
Pretty
through
good, eh?
stone and everything like that. But there is a sort of a very slight difference when they pass through material versus a void. So they put these
Yeah,
detectors in
James.
there, and they leave them
They're
for a
doing like
couple of
James
years, and they've got
Bond
them on the
too. I
outside
tried
as
to do
well, so
some
they're
James
measuring it
Bond
kind of from
shit
all these different angles.
lately, recently.
And putting all that data together and crunching it
Wanna do it.
has let them kind of put together a rough picture of where they think there are voids inside the pyramid. Right, so these are like empty spaces, and one of them was a small empty space behind above the main entrance. So the main entrance is above where we go in today. So today when you visit the pyramid, you go up on that north side and you enter in through what's known as Al Mamun's hole, or Mamun's hole. It's supposedly been hammered by the Caliph Al Mamun, and he sort of hammered through the limestone superstructure of the pyramid, and he hit the junction between the ascending and descending passageway.
Okay.
But up above that, you can see that in those chevron blocks. So the descending passageway actually goes all the way up to a doorway that's below those two triangle-shaped chevron blocks in that center top picture. Yeah, that one.
It's like I want to make it even bigger.
There's a doorway there. That's considered the original main entrance to the pyramid. Now, this was all in antiquity still cased over, so this wasn't visible.
Don't say that.
That at some point it was certainly opened in antiquity.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good setup. I like the setup.
But it's actually where the void is above that, sort of behind those chevrons. There's a small chamber, and they either drilled a hole or they found a space where they could stick a little tube in and then put one of those little snake cameras in there, and they had a look around, and sure enough there's this space, and it was a big this scientist revealed hidden corridor. I mean, this is this little chamber, and it's got these chevron blocks. It's like those chevron blocks keep going back into the superstructure of the pyramid, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. But we don't know that, because often some of these passages would be blocked up. That was certainly the case with the ascending passageway that comes off the descending passageway. Has these big granite plug blocks in it. But the really interesting part of this Scanned Pyramids project is that they found a massive void in the pyramid. A really large void. Like, this is a tiny little space that they've looked at. If you've seen the layout of the pyramid, 180 in the area above the Grand Gallery, it's kind of above it.
180.
They've found indication for what.
We gotta play it.
Next.
8 minutes? Oh no, I don't think I'm gonna watch 8 minutes of this.
The team's exactly the same. So far,
140.
the Dutch have been absolutely dart perfect. Really, they've not lost the leg.
Oh, do we not have the
Two
announcement?
darts against them in the pairs and the singles combined. So there's been no drama at all.
Untouchable so far. 97.
It's quite odd yesterday. Michael van Gerwen against Liam O'Brien of South Africa. He won his first 3 legs on double 2. What's all that about?
Finally won the match on double 6. 100.
Come on, timestamp me, please.
No doubt that Germany would settle for it going to the doubles.
Oh, here we go.
Again.
Here we go.
That's what they've set their team up for, haven't they?
No, I fucked it up. I dropped my fucking computer. Oh, you can't be fucking kidding. You can't be serious.
That's what they've set their team up for, haven't they? But you never know. There may be
64.
big upset. 54.
138. Germany require
Well, to leave
26 after 12.
Cannot miss right now. And he's not missing much. He's not missing anything. He's gone from being Mr. Popular. And how to win friends and influence people, it's pretty simple.
Okay, darts people are fucked up. This sucks, man. Like, why is fucking 180 exclusive content? What is even going on? You're huge ass. Yo. 180. Looking slim. Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, I'm a little slimmer. A little skinnier. Thanks, buddy. You're getting hassled by YouTube to sub. Yeah, YouTube. You can suck it. You can go fuck itself. Huge asshole. It's fucking hilarious, man. I want to just get one good 180 and then we'll go back to the video. So dumb.
Is just a huge chamber. Now this it's something like
180.
Which one is the Grand Gallery there?
So it's that large angled piece on the
We're
right.
back
See
already.
there?
We
It's
went
the
through
one
all
that's
the
just to
AI.
the right of
Went
the
through every
King's
single
Chamber.
one
It's
already,
angled
guys.
down like
Oh, I see it.
So if
Okay,
it gets
towards the top.
old,
yeah,
it'll stay
so
up pretty
it
fast. I'm
connects
sorry.
so
went through
the
like
descending
350.
passageway is the passageway that goes down to that kind of isn't to scale that picture. That's
Right, okay.
not even actually. I don't know. That's not the architecture for the pyramid. That's Pharaoh Osmos. That's a completely sort of different. Yeah, that's not the actual pyramid.
Okay.
That's like there's a lot of chambers that aren't there on that map. But it's a huge. Yeah, that's probably.
Oh, that's a thick
Alright,
diagram.
I got
Yeah, this is probably a little closer
start.
to reality.
I got a lot to do. I got weed to smoke. Got weights to lift. I got
There you go.
Is it obvious to you
Smiles
when you go into the pyramids that
to
these
give,
things were made for
to
people
make.
to walk through?
No, not at all. It doesn't feel at all that way. I actually think it.
to
I
have.
don't think they were made for humans. Put it that way. And I don't think they were tombs either. I don't. They certainly. I mean, this is not a. This would not have been an easy space to take some sort of formal procession of Pharaoh's body into these places. It's ridiculously difficult to move around in them today, and we've added steps and handrails. You know, it's a difficult exercise for anyone. Just the passages are like 3.5 feet high and feet square, so you do this pyramid crouch thing. They're on a pretty steep angle, going up and down. The longest passage is like 300 feet or something. The descending passageway that goes down to the subterranean chamber, and it's quite an exercise getting out of there. And you know, I can only imagine how difficult that might have been without the modern steps and handrails that we put in there to help people. It's not an easy task at all. And then you get into spaces like
these
the Grand
these
Gallery.
images are gonna get pretty stale
I mean,
after I think 2 or
that
3
thing
rounds.
there's so many indications in there that had some sort of function.
Dude, it's just so
outrageous.
insane.
There's all these slots on the side of the walls. It's as if there was
I think
a
I wrote like
mechanism moving
Morrowind,
up and down. I know
amethyst,
there's
crystal
architects
armor or
that-
some
and,
shit.
and proposals that suggest this was almost like a sliding lever room that they would use to haul blocks up and do things like this. I'm not convinced. Chris Dunn has his theories about that those slots might have been used to house like series of Helmholtz resonators that were part of this whole pyramid machine that he proposes. I'm interested in any functional take on it. I don't have one personally. I get the indication from being in there that it feels like a machine, man. It feels like you're walking around in the guts of a machine. It's just what it feels like. It doesn't feel like it's meant for humans. You can see the stairs and the handrails on this, but this is the Grand Gallery.
Oh, wow.
It's like,
How big is that?
it's huge. It's probably about 40 meters long, and God, it must be 4 or 5 meters tall at the very top. It steps up. It has that stepped sort of, it narrows as it goes taller. And along the edges of the walls you have these slots. At the very bottom of it you go straight, and that goes to the chamber known as the Queen's Chamber. And at the top you go straight through an antechamber and then into the granite structure known as the King's Chamber. So the void that they found, however, is actually above this, and it's equivalent in size, so more or less equivalent. It's something like 40 meters long, 4 meters wide, and potentially 4 meters tall. They're not quite sure if it's angled or if it's straight, but and they kind of proved their mechanism and their procedure with the first void. Like they did their scans and they said there's probably a void right here, and this one's right, near the
I just
near the
weighed
front entrance.
myself. Guess how much
And
I
sure
weigh?
enough, they drill a hole in there, they stick their little camera in there, and like there it is. We found this. There's a
180.
very, very high likelihood that there's a void there. There's undiscovered chambers inside the Great Pyramid. So who knows?
Yeah, dude,
We'll
196.
reveal, and I very
Sorry,
much
I gotta
hope
stop
that
yelling into the mic.
if it is
196.
explored or plumbed, or they drill into
On
it
the
to take
dot.
a look, that it's data that's shared with everybody, because it feels like this is,
That was a good guess, man.
everybody's history.
You're within
in this
4 pounds.
Now, when you were at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and some of these other sites, Karahan Tepe, are there any
Wow, that's pretty light.
are there any rocks or stones that
I'm
show
trying- like, I was
any of
trying to
these
bulk.
machining marks that you found in
I
Egypt?
guess not anymore.
For all the time that we have been alive, the U.S. dollar has been the primary currency.
Job-
That may
yeah,
not be the
I know
case
what you
for much
mean.
longer.
If I get
China
a
is set to
job
dethrone
and
the dollar,
start going to
possibly
work,
much sooner than you think. And even the world's biggest economies are already
That
ditching
might
the dollar for the yen.
happen.
Collapsing the U.S. currency.
If I have a job and like wake up every morning and go to work.
And if that wasn't enough, this paves the way for the government to take total control over all of your money with a new digital dollar. Now is the time to take total control of your money and not let your life savings become a casualty of the currency wars. And you can do it using the only precious metal dealer that I trust, American Hartford Gold. They will show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio into physical gold
Are
and silver.
digitizing? What does that mean?
Amazing customer service and a buyback commitment. But you don't
Are
have
they
to
not?
take my word for it. American
Are they not
Hartford
already
Gold has a 5-star
digitized?
rating from thousands of reviews and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. American Hartford Gold supports content like this that is committed to bringing you the truth. And if you tell them I sent you, they will give you $5,000 in free silver on your first order. So call them now. Click on the link in the description or call 855-679-1326. That's 855-679-1326 or text CONCRETE, KONCRETE, to 65532. Again, the phone number is 855-679-1326 or text CONCRETE to 65532. Now back to the show.
Not at those sites that I've seen. No,
Okay.
it's definitely. I mean, you don't see the same sort of advanced what I would term the signs of advanced technology that you see in places like Egypt and Peru, for that
Nice.
matter,
It's looking good now.
and in other areas of Baalbek.
It's gonna be
But
digital
I
dollars.
didn't see that on these
What?
sites.
Are you
There's
serious?
certainly some very
It's happening, man.
significant achievements, but
They're doing it.
It is, in my estimation, all things that can be done with.
Because there's no one has any cash,
I
man.
mean,
There's
in
no
Karahan
cash.
Tepe,
It's
there's
not
still
real.
A stone that's in a
Nothing's
quarry.
real.
It's a T-pillar that's been cut out. It probably weighs around 30 tons. I mean, so that's that's doable. There's flint everywhere. Like that's the other thing. You see when you're looking around on the ground, there's flint chips everywhere. I can probably pull up some pictures of it. Yeah, we would just on the site, particularly at Karahan, you can find
bro.
all of these chippings and like little flint, either arrowheads or they're pieces that have come off, flint chisels or blades, and it's all worked flint. You can tell it's all been nabbed. Found dozens of them and just pick them up, take a photo, throw them down. But yeah, there's a big T-pillar still in a quarry that's attached. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, but logistically, sure, you can move 30-ton loads. That said, there are other sites in Turkey that do. I have not visited them yet. I think there's one called, I think it's Zanaki Tepe. It's kind of hard to say, but it looks very much classical, sort of megalithic, matches the stuff in Egypt. I've seen photos of tube drills and other indications, and it would take more investigation to see, well, is this specifically something that needs some sort of advanced tech to do. I'm pretty careful about specifically what I say is like, well, this can or can't be done with primitive methodologies. It's very specific signatures in stone. It's particular achievements, and it's things like precision that we've measured, not just eyeballed, stuff like that. And I also classify like the massive logistical challenges over like say 250, 400, 1,000 tons. I don't think we've answered the question or satisfied the statement that can all be done with primitive methods. Like I think you can do that, and people have demonstrated moving large loads. Up to 100, 150 tons, maybe even 200 tons. I don't know, but at some point to me there's a line. I don't know if it's at like 300 or 400. I mean, anything above 400 tons. I'm really starting to question that this can be done with purely primitive methodologies, particularly those attributed to the dynastic Egyptians in this case, because You know, the Romans could do a lot of things, but the Romans used pulleys and capstans, and they had metal, they had steel, they had a lot more capability than what we know the dynastic Egyptians had. Remember in the Old Kingdom, and for
It's skipping a lot of photos. Like, why?
There's no evidence.
It's skipping the majority of photos.
They didn't use force multipliers.
Because it has too long a name. Like, why would it do that?
Ropes and human horsepower. There's no evidence they even used animals to haul stuff around. So that's a very much a different challenge when you're talking about gigantic, you know.
I have to rename every single fucking photo.
objects,
That's
right,
why
that
it's
weigh
not going
1,000
through all of
tons,
them.
of which there is evidence for many.
And
In fact, I think there's evidence that stones of this size were even being removed from quarries prior to the pre-dynastic civilization. I think there's strong evidence for that at the Aswan Quarry. It's a new area of it that I.
When was the pre-dynastic? When was pre-dynastic?
So the
Yeah, give us like the rough
oh, every
timeline.
time you
yeah, I
click
can
it, it restarts, I think.
And Cleopatra
See, I tried to
was
change it, I think it
most
restarted, but
recent.
it
She was
restarts
the
it.
She was the last, right? And I think, I don't remember where I saw this, but Cleopatra is actually closer to us than to
Indeed, the building of the Great
the
Pyramid.
building of the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, so this here
Randomized
gives you an idea.
playback.
So, you know, you're talking about a
Let's
little
randomize the
earlier
playback.
than
Okay.
3000 BC, so around 3150.
Randomized
is
playback.
more or less
Hopefully
the
it
date
plays
where you
really
have
random,
Menes,
like
the first
truly
pharaoh of the
random.
First dynasty.
So like 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, a little more even. That was so anything prior to that is what you would call pre-dynastic times.
Okay.
And there's a few cultures that we associate it with that, the Nadak culture, several others. It's a very interesting time because we get a lot of very interesting artifacts that come from that time. Things like, you know, precision-made stone vases, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But that's the early. It's what's known as the early period, the first couple of dynasties. You know, then. You know, sort of 2700 BC or thereabouts, we get into what's known as the Old Kingdom. This is the famous period. I love studying this period, probably my favorite period. This is where the mega pyramids come in. This is the huge granite works of, you know, the Valley Temple, the Sphinx is in here. All of this stuff that happens in the Old Kingdom.
This is where mainstream archaeologists believe that this is when they
Bounding size aspect ratio
Yeah, they date
automatic.
this, so the pyramids are all dated to a
Which
reign of
files?
or a family. In
Delete.
fact, the people don't realize this. It's like
Add.
the
Add
great the
files.
stone pyramids, the massive stone
Fine.
pyramids.
We're
All
gonna
of them. I mean,
add
just
the
in
files.
Giza alone, those three pyramids
This
supposedly
shit's
were built
not
in a period
fucking
less than 100
cooperating.
years together, like with success. Because you
There
had,
we fucking
you
go.
had this is the
Now we
Orthodox
got all the
time frame. You had
files. Now we got
Khufu,
all
then you had his
300.
son,
Let's go,
possibly his brother, I
randomized.
think Khafre built the middle pyramid, and then Menkaure,
Yes.
who might have been his son. So you got these successive generations that apparently built these pyramids. And if you go back a little bit to include the other massive stone pyramids that are attributed to one guy, Sneferu, who was the first pharaoh, I think, of the 4th dynasty. You know, he has 3 pyramids. He has the massive pyramid. There's at Maidum, which is just a huge structure. There's the bent pyramid, which is, I mean, probably the best preserved, at least the exterior structure is the bent pyramid. The casing stones are all locked together, and then most of them are still in place. And then the red pyramid. So the bent pyramid and the red pyramid are at a place called Dashur, and they're about the same size as the middle pyramid. So very close. These are
That's
the
my
same size.
IMVU
So if you take
dream.
all of those stone pyramids.
All the avatars
they
hanging
were
out,
all supposedly built in just
watching
like
people on
150-year
Twitch.
period, according to the
Avatars
It's-
watching avatars,
It's kind of
hanging out.
silly. And if you,
That's the dream.
Sneferu alone, I have a video on Sneferu. I mean, there's so many questions. Like, they never found him. They didn't find any burials. This is the same story, right? No inscriptions, no burials, no remains in these pyramids. And why does a pharaoh need 3 pyramids? They kind of go, well, you know, he kind of stuffed up on the bent pyramid and he didn't get it right, so, you know, it has this angle change to it, which was a mistake, which is complete nonsense. You don't make, you know, these things aren't made up as they go along. And then they go, well, it's, then he did the red pyramid, he was probably buried in the red pyramid. It's like, why does he need 3 pyramids? And if he did build all 3 pyramids, I think I did the math at one point, it's in the video, I think it was like over a 25 or even 40-year period, I think you had to have cut and installed more than 350 tons of stone every day for that entire period to build those 3. That's finished. Like,
In
that's
40 years.
In 40 years.
It's so
something like
sick,
that.
man.
You have similar logistical challenges with the Great
Like,
Pyramid, right?
it's so sick.
In a period of 25 years, because you have to, this explanation for how these things were built is constrained by the fact that they have a rough idea of how long the kings they associate to them lived or ruled. And of course, you want to build your pyramid while you're alive. You want to be buried in it. The next guy to come along may not finish that for you. He might take it off you. Who knows what, right? So they go for Khufu, for example, the Great Pyramid, roughly 25 years. The math works out with that thing with, 2.5 million stones, more or less making it up, and it's something like, 5 to 6 million tons. It's one block, quarried, cut, transported, dressed, finished, put in place, complete every 5 minutes. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year.
What's the average weight of those blocks?
About 2.5 tons. With blocks ranging up to like 60, 70 plus tons, like the granite blocks in its core. A good example, I love this story. I use it in one of the videos that I have on looking at this sort of this absurd timeline of these pyramids. So in France, there's a well-known article. This was shown in the Revelations of the Pyramids, a documentary made by a good friend of mine, Patrice Poyard. Fantastic film. But there was a quarry in France. They dug a hole, basically. They quarried out a stone or something like this big pit, and it was roughly the same volume as the Great Pyramid of Giza. And they used it as this big hole in it. And they're like, all right, well, we finished quarrying or we finished doing this, so we just use this for a dump, for like material, like rock or whatever from these building sites. So they would literally just dump trucks that just back up with this, whatever, dirt, digging material from other sites and just dump into it. 24 hours a day, it was just this one operation. When all these construction projects, they just drive trucks up and just dump into it. It took them 12 years to fill it. By dumping into it with modern dump trucks, 24 hours a day, all the time, 12 years just to fill that space. And you're trying to tell me that in 25 years you're building what is still one of the most precisely made structures on the planet in terms of alignment, the incredible precision that is exhibited in the stonework on the inside, the orientation of the entire structure you've got. And not included in that figure, by the way, is, not for nothing, is the bedrock. I mean, you've probably got years of planning, right, just to survey it and plan and design this thing. Then they actually had to level the bedrock, and they had to get down to a point. They didn't level it entirely. There is a primordial mound sort of thing in the middle, which is another interesting fact that relates to a lot of other sites. But it sits on tiles. There are foundation tiles around this pyramid, some of them weighing 200 to 250 tons. A lot of people walk up and look at the pyramid, but make sure you look down at your feet. You're walking on something that was constructed before they ever laid the first stone down to build the pyramid. So all of that's probably taken years as well, and then you've got to go through this process of actually constructing the thing and finishing it, because the inside, they definitely use mortar, and there's it's not you wouldn't call it like super precise, most of the superstructure, but the exterior casing stones were incredibly well made, as was a lot of the structures on the inside. The whole massive granite structure that's in the center that is the King's Chamber is part of, and is what is above it. There's like 5 or 6 chambers above it, all made out of granite. So yeah, all of this happens in the Old Kingdom. So you go from there, you have these intermediate periods. They're essentially periods when there's civil unrest, or there's disconnection between Upper and Lower Egypt. There's something happens to disrupt the unity of Egypt. The Middle Kingdom runs from dynasties 11 to 14. Another intermediate period, the New Kingdom. That's a relatively famous period. You have guys like Ramses II, Merenptah, Seti I, notorious pharaohs, and this is actually an age of great power for the dynastic Egyptian civilization. They were very rich, very powerful during this period. Another third intermediate period, you have a late period, then you have what's called the Ptolemaic period, which is essentially the Greek-Roman period. And then the civilization, as we know it, comes to an end with Cleopatra, who famously commits suicide around 30 BCE. So, yeah, that statement that she's closer to us than to the building of the Great Pyramids is true. Like, it's what, just under 2,000 years since Cleopatra killed herself, but you have to go back, 2.5 plus like 2,700 years almost to the building of the pyramids. So
To the official building.
and that's the official date of the pyramid.
Right. Which people have speculated, you've speculated that it was a lot earlier than that, right? I question the dating of the pyramids. I think, it's a difficult thing to say, purely because you're looking at the skeletal remains of something that's probably been worked on and renovated and reused and just
I mean, I'm sure the dynastic Egyptians were working on these things. They did things to them. They used them. They became part of their culture. My problem with the pyramid, particularly the Great Pyramid, because that's the one we studied the most, but actually most of them, obviously you have the logistical issues with the timeline that I talked about. I think these were multi-generational projects. They almost have to be. We've got tons of examples of that type of thing in our own time. How long it takes us to build, you know, the Panama Canal, or these giant projects. They're infrastructure projects. They take a long time. The problem I have with them is the precision and the knowledge that's encoded in them. Like, I think any honest analysis of the pyramids leaves you in a position where you have no choice but to reevaluate and rewrite history. You either end up, if you go, okay, the dynastic Egyptians built them, right? Fine. In that case, they had far more capability,
Right.
and far more knowledge than we've ever attributed to.
Oh
right?
wow, insane!
I
Did
think I've
know
talked
that.
before about the fact that you have the dimensions of the Earth encoded into the pyramid, right? It's essentially a scale model of the northern hemisphere. There seems to be
Oh, you're
information
just
about
joking.
the fact that the Earth's an oblate spheroid. That
Are you
it's
serious?
longer around the equatorial circumference than it is the polar circumference.
Right.
The grid of latitude and longitude, like that ratio, of the fact that we're slightly longer east to west than we are north to south. That ratio, if you knock it out on like a grid of latitude and longitude, those squares, they're not really squares, they're rectangular.
Because the way the Earth's shaped, the latitude lines are shorter than the longitude lines. So if you take a square unit, basically out of the Earth, starting at the equator, it would be wider than it is tall. And if you scale it down, it is like within inches, the exact
Yeah,
size.
I have it here. Let me grab it here. Pyramid stuff. It's actually called. This is it here. So it kind of starts here. This is where that ratio is encoded. It's in something called the socle,
Yes.
which is essentially a cubit high. It's like a little think of it as like a little platform the pyramid sits on. This gives you two ways to measure its perimeter, right? You can measure the perimeter based on the perimeter of the socle or the perimeter of the actual pyramid, and then. So this is exactly what you were talking about. So 1/4 of 1 minute of latitude at the equator on the Earth is 3,022.9 feet. A quarter of a minute of longitude is slightly longer at 30.
What the fuck happened here?
3.5 feet. And then so the perimeter length of the pyramid without the socle is 0.2 of a foot off, and this is 0.1 of a foot off, being exactly that same ratio. So you have latitude and longitude. You have the dimensionality of the planet. Which is Randall mentioned this the other day. It's we didn't really get an accurate understanding of that until we had satellite surveys and we did space observations in the 1980s. And it turns out, because we had a much different idea of this before that time, and the more accurate we became, the closer we got to the pyramid numbers. You know what I'm saying? Like we started to learn that actually the pyramid very accurately encodes this data. You have some other things on the pyramid, like it has that ratio of 4:3:2. This is one of those cosmically significant numbers that's in that pantheon of very interesting astronomical numbers, and it's
That's
at
a good
scale
one.
of 42,200. It essentially
Which one?
replicates the Earth. You multiply the height of the Great Pyramid by 42,200.
I missed it, bro. Sorry. Which one?
You multiply the base perimeter of it by 42,200. You get the equatorial circumference of the Earth.
This was coming up a lot yesterday with Randall,
Thanks,
and he
bro.
was explaining this plasmoid generator type thing and how the dimensions of the tubes and the sphere and the thumb.
Oh, guys, he's in the jungle. Yeah,
starts
it's
at,
pretty. Yo,
4
thanks,
inches,
man.
then it goes to 3, then it goes to
Thanks,
2.
dude.
That is used like throughout that whole mechanism, which is
Thanks,
Yeah, there's a lot of these numbers tend to repeat in lots of different ways, and Randall's a complete master at showing it all. But that's why I say that I think, and other people have argued that the speed of light's encoded in it, and there's obviously all this precision stonework in the pyramid. So, and it's a logistical achievement like no other that wasn't equaled until relatively modern times. I mean, so I think under either case, so either the dynastic Egyptians built it, or they didn't, right? So you have to, it's either one or the other. But if you go with they did, then we need to reevaluate and rewrite history based on what it means and what information they have and their capabilities. And we vastly underestimated the dynastic Egyptians. They were far more capable, and where did they get this data from, and how did they know it? Like, that's a rewrite of history. And if they didn't make it, like, they for sure worked on it, but if there was something else here and this inspired them, then that's another picture. Like, who did then? Like, so that's where you get to this concept of inheritance. And and this is why I'm a supporter of the lost ancient civilization hypothesis, is that I think the vast majority of evidence favors that answer. I just think there is so much evidence of renovation and reuse and imitation. I think it's like I'd look at dynastic Egypt, and I think this idea of them being basically a giant cargo cult, the world's most advanced cargo cult, makes a lot of sense, because you've got to imagine the other problem with the pyramids is that, you know, these are the first pyramids that were ever made. They're like, that's at the very pointy end. It's
The first ones were the best ones.
the first ones were the best. Yeah, the step pyramid's another story. I think that is dynastic. But then immediately after the step pyramid, you have these mighty, gigantic stone pyramids that were supposedly constructed. But they kept making pyramids after that. I mean, take a look at this. Like, so, you know, it's to me, it's why I get this term, a tale of two industries. You have the earliest pyramids of these giant stone structures that are still standing today. They kept building pyramids right through the Middle Kingdom, but they were making them from mud brick, and they were much smaller, and they were much less sophisticated. And they're today eroding away slowly because this is how they were made. It's like this technology just disappeared if they had it, and then they were trying to imitate these other pieces of these other works with mud bricks. And in fact, this is also supported, this primitive methodology is supported by scenes on the wall. Like, there is a scene of pyramid building, like, but it's mud bricks. It's literally, it's in the Tomb of the Noble on the west bank of the Nile.
How do they make mud bricks?
Well, they'd put together these mud, they'd bake them in the sun, or they might have baked them in ovens, and they'd make these big mud bricks, and then they'd transport them to, you know, it's like straw or hay and mud, and you bake it.
I don't know, foods
stick it in a mold,
crashes the
and
most
cook it.
since October.
Geopolymer
What's
is
hormone
what it is.
foods?
It's a form of geopolymer.
Stuff about
And then they'd stack
yeah,
them up,
dude,
and
me
they
too,
build it
man.
that way. It's a process that continues
Dude,
to
I
this day.
I do
Doing
too,
stuff that
Baron.
way,
It's
but
pretty
that's how
scary
they
shit,
built it.
dude.
And so what's interesting to me is that this concept that, you know, there's an advanced version of a particular thing. Pyramids is one of them, and a primitive version of a particular thing that matches the tools and techniques that we know about, right? We know that they were relatively primitive. They didn't use the wheel. They used manpower. They used primitive tools like flint chisels and pounding stones and, you know, wooden implements for this sort of stuff. And there's scenes on the wall that support it, right? So they showed us how they did it. That exact set of circumstances exists not only for pyramids, but it exists for vases, for columns, for boxes, for slabs. There's an advanced and then there's a primitive version of that, and I've been slowly trying to document that in detail over the last couple of years and look at each category of these and say, okay, so what matches the tools that we know they could use and the techniques that we know that they used and the stuff they drew on the walls that showed us how they did it versus the stuff that isn't explainable via those mechanisms. And so that's why I think when you look at these advanced things and you look at what the dynastic Egyptians were doing and you look at their own history and what they say about their past, all of a sudden this idea of inheritance, you know, and a longer timeline, the fact that maybe they got a kickstart, you know, when they finally came out of that Neolithic or Mesolithic Stone Age and they began civilization, they had enough people and they could organize and they might have started with all of these artifacts and objects. And you know, and that's actually what they say too. Like, they trace their own history back some 36,000 years. Like, their origin.
I don't know if they're really doing
story,
random of every
God
image.
walked the earth.
I think it might be
They
maxed
talk
out.
about the time of the Shamsu
Because I
Hall,
swear
these
it was
mythical,
looping
you know,
images.
demigod-like people with magical powers. All of these rulers, they have a king's list that goes back nearly, like I said, over 36,000 years, I think. And then it gets to the dynastic civilization at the end.
Who came up with the king's list?
Well, there's a couple different sources. There was an Egyptian priest called Menaeus that talked about it. The primary source for that is something
Yeah,
called the
like
Turin
we saw this
Papyrus.
one
There's
before.
also a Sumerian king's list.
I think it
that goes
maxes
back
out on the
30,000
number of
years or something.
really truly number
But
of
there's
that they
a Turin
can.
Papyrus, which is where this
slideshow.
is written, and it's actually in, I think it's even in Turin. But it's they deciphered it on the back of a piece of parchment. So we're lucky we've got that much of it because it's quite a long story about how that thing came to be. It was falling apart, and they managed to put most of it back together. But there's a couple different sources for that King's List. And not only that, they have
Yeah, like
cataclysm
we've seen
origin
this
stories.
photo
Like
over and over.
the story of Atlantis comes to us from Egypt. That's entirely, the source for that is all in Egypt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean that's where so Plato, in roughly 200 or 300 BC or thereabouts, he talks about it in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues. That's how we get the story. That's probably the best account we have of Atlantis. That comes from his ancestor Solon, who lived around 600 BC, and he tells the story of when he was in Egypt at a temple up in the delta. This
Yeah,
temple
like
doesn't
that's
exist
not
anymore, but
random.
there was a priest, an Egyptian priest, at one of these structures at this temple in the delta, that told him the story of Atlantis and said this happened 9,000 years ago, so Solon's 600 BC, 9600 BC, 11,600 years ago. That's the end of the Younger Dryas. It locks right in with Meltwater Pulse 1b when we know the sea levels rose. So this is the correlation. I think Graham Hancock made it. I don't know if he was the only one or he was the first. I'm not sure who, but this relates to Atlantis. And it comes from Egypt, and not only that, but it's also written on the walls of the Edfu Temple, the primeval
there.
Djiba story. It doesn't specifically say Atlantis, but it tells a story with Thoth, who it's one of the few sort of Thoth passages. I've got photographs of it actually. And they talk about the primeval land being an island that sank, and then they had to go to the homeland and build these primeval mounds that was where all the temples would be, and beneath these pyramids and a lot of these other structures you have primeval mounds. There's a lot of correlation to this concept of a lost civilization. Call it Atlantis, call it whatever you want, but that's why I think all of this evidence makes sense. So, the Egyptians are connected to it. We've got the evidence of the artifacts for it. And then I think you're also, with the Egyptian iconography, you're looking at that as well, because I do believe there is plenty of evidence that suggests a lot of these statues, not a lot, but certainly several of them, and certainly the very large ones, required significant technology and were beyond the capabilities of what we know about the dynastic Egyptians. So when I make the case for symmetry and precision in these statues, it's a question I sometimes get. It's like, well, how come, if you think these statues are so old, how come they look like Egyptians or dynastic Egyptians? And I think it's the other way around. I really do. I think the dynastic Egyptians modeled themselves and their culture after the stuff they inherited. It's that classic iconography of what we look at and we go, that's a pharaoh. That's if you had inherited that. There's the poem Ozymandias. Is it Percy Shelley who wrote it? It talks about a story of a desert traveller who comes across these two vast and trunkless legs of stone standing in the desert, and nearby he sees a giant visage that's half buried with a sneer of cold command. Like, you imagine coming along in a desert and seeing these legs and the head of this statue that was probably 1,200 tons and 90 feet tall, just broken down, and it's looking at you, and you're like, what the hell is this? I mean, if you had inherited this iconography, you would, and particularly if your culture was connected to it, like the Egyptians say they were, these are your gods, man. Like, these are your gods. And one thing that doesn't really change is in the actual tombs. So with all the beautiful artwork, and you see how the pharaohs depict themselves, that iconography of what they look like doesn't really change over the whole civilization. It's pretty similar. And they always depict themselves as being amongst the gods. Pharaohs were considered god kings, right? So and then generation after generation after generation, they get more powerful and more arrogant, and the hubris of it. So they would start to believe it, I guess, or start to claim these statues. Now, this is me. I'm going to write my name on this statue. I'm going to carve my name into it. And then, this is kind of what happens. These artifacts and the iconography becomes part of that culture and exists for 3,000 years. It becomes tightly integrated into it. These places probably became ceremonial places. So whether or not places like Giza or Saqqara had a functional purpose, Abu Sir for that matter, potentially had a functional purpose that had something to do with an advanced civilization, I think that's a possibility. I think it's worth investigating. But they would have become ceremonial because the dynastic Egyptians might have had a cultural memory of it, but they had no ability to do anything with it. So it becomes ceremonial. And again, you can make it a correlation of that. So imagine the Younger Dryas happens tomorrow. Touch wood, it doesn't. But if it happens tomorrow, within a couple generations, wipes out our civilization. Within a couple generations, I mean, we're going to be dancing around campfires, like with black pieces of stone that look like a cell phone, like we're trying to oh yeah, if we dance around the right way around this fire, this black piece of stone is going to tell me everything. I'll be able to talk to my ancestors. I can get all the data. Like the technology of yesterday becomes the myth and legend and magic, and you try to capture it through ceremony. I mean, it's plasma TVs are a story you tell around a fire at some point.
Right.
So long-winded explanation for how I do think it's a viable lens through which to try and view our past, like in particularly places like Egypt. I think there's a longer time frame involved.
And then going back to some of the inscriptions that are made on some of this stuff, like especially on the boxes that are inside the pyramids, it's very clear that the hieroglyphs that are carved into those things are much newer than the actual boxes themselves. And the boxes are perfect precision. The lines are straight. The angles are perfect. And then you have these sort of roughly cut, roughly chiseled hieroglyphics, or you know, it looks like they've been vandalized by a much later civilization.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think's happened in a few cases. And you know, here's an example. Like this is
this is a great example.
Yeah, Yusuf and I in the Serapeum with these, which is a site with, you know, these 100-ton thereabouts giant granite boxes, 24 of them or thereabouts housed in these underground galleries. Wonderful site. But you know, these boxes, I mean, I've looked at them in great detail. A number of them are pretty perfect. Like they've got 90-degree corners, they're flat surfaces, there's straight lines, all these things. You know, I love this image of it because
and another thing to point out is it's not the high relief.
Yeah, it's carved in.
It's carved in.
Although the Egyptians did do high relief carving eventually.
Okay.
They did good carving as well. But this is a good demonstration of kind of the point that you're making, and that I absolutely agree with. Is, you know, I love this image because on the corner, it's tough to see with the light there, but on that corner on the right hand side, you can see it's actually reflecting the light from the hallway in the stone. Like it's
so smooth.
It's what's smooth and it's polished, and this isn't a natural property of granite. Right? You got to work pretty hard to get a mirror finish on it. And then, you know, obviously the people who make it, they can make straight lines, they can make clean corners, but when you get to look at the writing, it's, you know, there's no straight lines. It's obviously the work of some dude with a chisel and a hammer.
If you made this box, why would you put this on it?
Yeah, if you were the maker of the box, you'd be pissed.
Yes.
You would be upset. And so to me, it's like, it's two different technologies, right? So the technology used to make the writing is primitive. It's totally achievable with hand tools. You can knock this out with a hammer and a chisel onto granite, and in places it's even the granite's too smooth where it's skipped over. There's no straight lines. And this illustrates one of the issues with a lot of modern or contemporary sort of Egyptology, which is that the writing is the bedrock of Egyptology. Once we translated hieroglyphs, that, you know, the Rosetta Stone, and we were able to sort of start to translate, and that's been a huge science. It's wonderful, actually. It becomes the bedrock of how we date and relate objects and artifacts, because it's whatever was written on them. It's not the only way, but whatever's written on these things becomes the primary methodology for how we date them. So if it is written on them, so you have the name of a guy on an artifact, it's just like, well, the inference is therefore that he probably had this thing made for him, and therefore he might have even made the whole site. It's not the only method that's used, but it is a primary one. It's probably the first one they'd go to for dating stuff. And what's interesting, even on this box here, is one of the other issues with this idea is that you actually have an empty Shen ring on this box, or a cartouche, which doesn't have a name in it. So it's all carved up, and there's an empty Shen ring in here, and all you have to do is imagine that there's the name of a pharaoh in this Shen ring, and then the history books would say that it was this guy that made this box and probably this whole site, and that's how the whole story, that's what ends up in a history textbook.
Yeah.
But it's empty, and we don't know whose name was going in here. I suspect it was whoever was going to pay the priests that ran the place the most, because this box was probably being sold for dedication. Right? This is the priests run this site. We know there were all over the Serapeum. There's, you know, there's little indentations on the walls that have, you know, they were these little limestone or granite steles that you would put in there and have a dedication to yourself, and this was a service was being sold by the priests that were running the place. Like, it's one of the issues with it. And, you know, it goes further. Once you start to see this dichotomy of technology between the artifacts themselves and, you know, and the writing, you start to see it in a lot of places. And this is a great example I like to show people. Yeah, it's a Hyksos Sphinx, but you can see that the ribs are kind of being shown up by just the light almost is being used, to the reflection to show that the rib line on this thing. But then you take a close look at the hieroglyphs and they're just crudely chiseled. Like, it's, you know, you see the hammer marks, you see the fact that it's done by hand. And here's another key indicator for me: the hieroglyphs are never polished. Right, so the rest of the stone is polished, and there's obviously, it's not all flat surfaces and easy polishing. There's lots of interesting and tight sort of parts of the stonework that were polished, but the hieroglyphs are never polished. So, you know, for example, if you look at some of these incredible statues that come from the Old Kingdom, you know, you have the top of the chest, the clavicle here is all beautifully done. You have the fingernails, the cuticles, the insides of the fingernails. All of that stonework's polished, right? This isn't flat surfaces. So they were capable of polishing stone. Whoever built this statue could polish stone in whatever form they wanted to. There's dust all over this statue, but it is polished. And, you know, you get these beautiful examples of knees. Like, this is one of the best knees in stone. I mean, this is granodiorite, not for nothing, but incredible musculature and bone structure.
Diorite?
Granodiorite.
Granodiorite. How hard is that stone?
Slightly harder than granite. Somewhere it's like a mixture between granite and diorite.
And what is the hardest stone on Earth?
Diamond.
And diorite's how far?
Diorite's like a 7.5. So diamond's a 10 on the Mohs scale of hardness. You know, things like hardened steel might be a 6.5, and granite can be a 6.5 to a 7. Some are diorite and flint, and some of the other harder stones, you know, either porphyry or dolerite can go up to like 7.5, 8.
Okay.
Corundum, topaz, things like this are a 9, and we have artifacts made from things like corundum that they were shaping with a 9. I mean, and copper and bronze are like 3 and 4. You know, these are extreme. Marble's like a 3. Calcite's like a 3. This is why a lot of sculpture's done in marble these days.
So the statue of David, is that marble?
Yeah, marble. It's much softer than this stuff. Like, incredibly. Yeah, if you're a modern sculptor, you ain't working granite just because. Like, it's not a good choice. Like, you're going to burn your tools out. It's going to be a nightmare. And modern sculptors will know this. But, you know, the point is that, again, even with decent hieroglyphs like this, you know, it's not polished, right? Even in the good hieroglyphs that are on the side of this statue, like this, the interior of the bird, not polished. The shen ring around the king's cartouche there, not straight and not polished. The lotus flower motif below it is polished. Like, so it's like, when this is a different. This was done with a different technology, potentially done at an entirely different time. So it's difficult to say then that the writing is how we can date and relate this artifact into the story of history. It's entirely possible that this was inherited, we don't know how old it is, and then somebody wrote their name on it later and claimed it. And in fact, we have evidence of that very thing. In fact, here's one more good example of the polish. I like this shot because it shows you the polished stone, and then you can see the chisel marks. This is all this, these hieroglyphs, they're good, but they're all done by hand. You know, and we know that the practice of writings of somebody usurping an artifact, Flinders Petrie called Ramses II the Great Usurper. He's one of the, people think about him as one of the most powerful kings of ancient Egypt. But he was notorious for writing his name on stuff. This is an example here I can show you real quick. It's like, that's the cartouche of Ramses II right here. This big guy here, it's carved in very deeply into, I actually love this photograph. He's carved it deeply into what is a reused section of an obelisk. But look closely at the end here.
Oh yeah, that bird?
He's carving over the top of a pre-existing inscription. So you can see it here where he's blending in. They got quite good at like writing over the top and like blending in his stuff into a pre-existing inscription.
Oh wow.
And I mean, there's artifacts with 2 or 3 or 4 even different pharaohs' names on them. And Ramses became notorious. He would carve his stuff really deeply because he didn't want other people doing to him what he was doing to others. But you know what I love about this particular picture is you're actually looking at 2 or 3 different reuses of a particular artifact, right? So this piece of stone was originally probably part of an obelisk, right? It's a broken piece of an obelisk. They had a place called Tanis, which is literally was forested with obelisks and columns. And if you've seen obelisks, the ones that have writing on them, the writing's vertical, right? It's not horizontal. It's vertical.
Yes. When the obelisk just stands up.
Yeah. So the writing on this, so this isn't original writing. So not only did this obelisk break,
This thing was originally standing up vertical.
yeah, it's a piece of an obelisk, most likely.
Yeah.
And so it was and they were reused. There's even like these walls that they built at Tanis. I mean, there's a foot from a 1,000-ton statue that's been repurposed into a block in a wall. So they were reusing broken pieces of stones in walls. So not only did they reused it once as a block in a wall, then someone wrote something on it the first time, and then later on, who knows how long later, Ramses II comes along and writes over it again. So this thing's been inherited, renovated, and reused like 2 or 3 different times, and it's written on horizontal. So
And all the vertical obelisks are written on vertically.
the ones that have writing on them, yes. So it's hard to say, how can you take this cartouche and say, well, Ramses had this block of stone quarried and shipped to the side, and you know, we don't know that. You can't date the stonework. So it's a great example of inheritance.
What are the people saying that push back against this? It's football season, baby, and you know what time it is. Time to gamble all that hard-earned money on some sports. As a bettor, you demand perfection, and that's where MyBookie delivers. NFL, college football, and a brand new cash-out system give you the options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay already hit, you can cash it out early and place another bet, or sweat it out and let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join the MyBookie family for an entire season filled with daily odds boosts, same-day parlays, and super contests. And this season, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code DJP on a deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 cash instantly into your MyBookie account. Bet your deposit amount once, and you're ready to withdraw at any time. Again, that's promo code DJP to claim your cash deposit bonus. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. Like, how do they defend this when confronted with some of this stuff?
Well, I mean, with the inheritance, I mean, the reuse of stuff, it's not really defended. It's not. I mean, it's not like trumpeted as a common thing, but it's acknowledged that Ramses would reuse stuff, but it's kind of a weird. It's only in certain cases where they have very specific. Oh, okay, we've got 3 names of rulers on this artifact, so therefore this is probably older. He might have renovated this, but they don't. Yeah, they don't really acknowledge it as a possibility for a lot of the stuff, and I think it is. Even the statues, like there's the big statues at Luxor have the names of 2 or 3 different pharaohs on some of them. They just don't. I mean, one of the problems with, I mean, I hate to use the term, but it's just like mainstream or orthodox Egyptology is that they don't really consider the engineering aspects of the stonework. They don't care about precision or symmetry. They don't care about, you know, the base scan work, for example, that we've been doing. It's not really factoring into the decision making. You know, they look at who's written on it. They look at what scenes are on the wall. They look at the other data they can do to support and say that's where it is. I genuinely don't know how they think about this. I mean, for sure they'd probably point to the fact, well, you know, we get the same sort of questions like, where are the tools, and you know, where's all the structures and all of that stuff. I think we're looking at some of the structures. I think we're looking through the lens of thousands and thousands of years of renovation, reuse, remodeling, and then thousands and thousands of years of destruction and quarrying, and you know, it's a really difficult picture to put together, particularly in Egypt, because it's, you know, people, even within their own civilization, they were reusing stuff, but who knows when it started, that they kept reusing and rebuilding and changing the sites, and then for thousands and thousands of years after, they've been used as quarries for stone. People take the stone and they chop it up, and it's all a great source for granite, you know. Even during the Egyptian civilization, this was happening. Ramses II was quarrying granite from the Middle Pyramid at Giza to go use in some of his other structures at like Lisht and a couple of other places. And it's written on the wall at the pyramid. He's like, I am the quarry master for Ramses II, and we were taking the stone from here because he's the boss, you know.
What was the original stone that was casing like the very outer shell of the pyramids? It was like a very white, shiny stone.
Yeah, so it depends. The Great Pyramid and most of the Middle Pyramid was something called Tura limestone. Yeah. In fact, Mount Nemrut in Turkey is also made from Tura. It's a very hard form of limestone, and yeah, it's very white and pure. So it's not a local stone. They had to get it from a quarry a distance away.
And who stripped all that off?
Well, a lot of it was probably done started really with the Persian occupation, but everybody.
Right.
Anyone that could. It wasn't so the pyramid. The story goes is that there was
Dang, that
the
Persian
pyramid had
Empire.
its casing stones, and they're rock. Xerxes. A bar in there to pry, and they're huge. They're like 3, 4. Some of the casing stones are bigger than the other blocks, so some of those might have been 4 or 5 tons. Funnily enough, the Middle Pyramid actually has giant blocks in its construction too, even on the outside, like 50, 60-ton blocks. But the story goes that I think there was an earthquake, and I'm probably going to get the date wrong, at the 400-ish AD, there was a big earthquake. It might have been even earlier than that. But it shook loose a couple of these casing stones. So it either tilted them or it busted one out, and a big shake-up, and some stuff fell off. And then that gave people purchase to like scaffold their way up there and scurry up there and then start prying these things out, and then just like letting them fall, and then it went from there. And it's a valuable stone. It's obviously useful for all sorts of purposes, but one of its main purposes was you could grind it up and make like a plaster out of it. You grind it up, mix it with water, and you make a fine plaster that you can plaster over things and carve into. And I mean, literally the only reason we have a few casing stones still left on the pyramid is because of the piles of quarry rubble. There was 50, 60 feet of quarry rubble pushed up against the base of the pyramid from all of the quarrying activity that covered up the few remaining casing stones that were still at the bottom. Yeah, Flinders Petrie always decried this, and he was always admonishing people for this, because he'd said and this is literally like 100 to 130, 40 years ago. At all of these places, he said, everyone who's anybody has a headstone made from the stuff, like the stone from the pyramid. And every day there's just camel trains of people taking stone all the time. And he actually excavated through the rubble, he found the casing stones, he documented them, and then he reburied them. He's like, if I leave this open, it's gonna be gone, no question. So he reburied it. It's like, they'll have to work to get to that. So yeah, I mean, it's just people don't care. Most people are just interested in enriching themselves. They're not that worried about taking the stone. But it's human nature thing. But you get to the Middle Pyramid, the bottom 2 courses, maybe the first, maybe also the second. For sure, the first was cased in granite. Like literally all of those casing stones were granite. The bottom layers, like the bottom 2 layers, it's really cool. In fact, I probably have a picture of it here. Yeah, so this is the bottom pyramid here. So these casing stones are like the same shape as the ones on the other pyramid, but these are granite, and they're huge, and they're perfect. You walk around the Middle Pyramid, it's littered with these amazing casing stones, and you see this dashed line that's in this.
Yeah.
That's an attempt to quarry it. In fact, they were looking to split this whole face off it and get to this square block behind it. So this is you see this everywhere on these sites, and people are like, what are those dashed lines? It's quarry. It's called a wedge and chisel. So you'd use like steel chisels, you'd just hammer away at it, you'd create these divots, and then you'd get wood or something, or you can sometimes use stone too, like flint. But wood was good because you'd pound wood into it, then you'd wet it, and when wood gets wet, it swells. So it would
What's up, King Nick? Let's flex for King Nick. Let's do it.
Chisels or steel chisel, and just hammer into these gaps, and what you're trying to do is crack the stone along the line and take a piece. And yeah, I mean, these things were perfect. These casing stones were perfect with their angle, and they're all polished on the outside, and there's tons of it just from quarry rubble.
Talking about the boxes, it's funny. I was reading Chris's book this morning. This is his first one. He's a Death Star, or he's a PowerPoint. And he was saying how he interviewed he talked to like the guy who ran the biggest granite manufacturing company in the U.S. And he asked them what it would take, what the resources would be to reproduce one of those massive granite blocks that were basically hollowed out on the inside. And the guy said it would take at least $2,000 just to quarry it.
No, more than it's 200,000.
That's what I meant.
Nice grid,
200,000.
thanks.
Yeah, $200,000 just to quarry it. Another like $50,000 to transport it.
What was I even doing?
And then he's like,
I'm so
"It would make
distracted.
no
Whatever.
sense
I'm
for
doing more
us to
flies.
hollow out a single piece. We would just take 4 or 5 pieces and we would bolt them all together. That's right. Because like we would never just hollow it out.
They couldn't. Well, you'd need to develop the tool. Like modern granite processing, we cut slabs.
Right.
We quarry them out in the quarry in like big blocks, and then we cut them into slabs for kitchen counters or whatever use. When you talk about doing granite sculpture, which happens, people do like complex shapes in granite. It takes very specific tools. And man, hollowing out a single piece of granite like that would cost a bomb in the tooling to make that happen. You burn out all half the tools trying to do. That's a big volume space. But yeah, and remember these prices that they're like. I mean, when do you write that book in the 90s? I mean,
Right.
So that's you got prices probably double that easy since then.
And then the saw cuts too, like the saw cuts, then the errors in the saw cuts. Like if you take a skill saw and you're trying to cut something and you go into it and you realize, you got the angle wrong. You pull it out real quick and then you go back in and make another cut. There's evidence for this.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it slowly with whatever methods they have, they claim they had to cut those stones, you wouldn't be going the wrong way, then pull back out and then start going the right way. You would obviously be going so slow that you would be able to make adjustments along the way.
That's right, and there's plenty of evidence for overcuts and exactly that type of thing is one of the reasons why I think, look, we're seeing evidence for, call them power tools, call them just power
Guys,
tools.
I'm sorry, my girlfriend just pulled up,
Stuff.
surprised,
And
so I might have to sign
that's
off.
one of the best. I have. We can look at some of those.
So if I disappear for some time, it's
Just
because
cuts. You see these cuts
I'm
all over
seeing
the
her.
place. I don't know
She
if it's
just pulled up
this
out
is
of
all broken up
surprise.
stone now, but there's these types of things you see all over at
Send for the link on the video? Sure,
on the
buddy.
basalt pavement. But one of my favourite ones is actually, I really like the edge of this thing. It's a slab at Abu Sir. It's this beautiful slab. And if you look along the edge, it's been like just finely touched with some sort of powerful tool that's sort of been backed out. It's got, this thing's got markings all over. You have these giant circular saw depressions here and here. Lord. You can look at how many times this thing's been touched on.
What is this made of?
This is, I think it's schist. I think it's schist, or it's blue quartzite maybe. It's a very unique piece. I'm amazed it's still there, because a couple of people could probably move it. And it's just a remarkable piece of stone. Let's see where else you got. Yeah, so Juice is pointing out the big circular saw indentation. All the colours come out of it when you wet it. We usually wet this one and show people. And it was actually, so it was cut right through here at the end and then snapped off. You can see that on the end here. Cut straight through. Here's some other looks at the circular saw marks on this thing. Absolutely amazing tooling marks in this. And
Perfectly straight.
yeah, and you have, I think it's in statues. I want to show you the overcuts. Yeah, I mean, you have stuff like this, right? So this is at Karnak Temple. I just did a video on this. This is in an obelisk, and you literally have circular saw overcuts, and you see them on statues too. But you can literally see on this one here where it was exactly what you were talking about. Like,
Oh yeah, you see right there, yeah.
it was reset. Like the angle of the cut was reset.
Yep.
And it was some sort of giant circular saw because they start narrow. They start here and they penetrate and they get deeper. And then they peter out at the bottom. Like the profile fits a big circular saw. And in fact, there's some more of these at Karnak, and I do this in the video, but I've plumbed them with like a key card where you can show the depth increasing, show the profile of a circular saw cut.
Oh really?
Yeah, I mean it's
So the depth varies from the middle being the deepest, and then it gets shallower towards the end.
Yeah, I mean this is a classic example of a circular saw cut. You see this here, right? I mean, it's hard to. They had straight saws too. I should say that it's not all circular saws. There was absolutely straight saws too. This piece is very interesting. This is at a place called Abu. If Chris Dunn does talk about this in his book, a lot of people talk about this. I think even maybe Petrie talked about it. But you see how you clearly can see the orientation of the saw, right? Here's the crazy thing to think about this piece. It's concave. See this line in the center here? can actually see it here. See this curve?
Yes.
So it's shaped like this. It's concave. So it's cut this way, and it seems to have been cut this way. So it's not straight. So what I think you're looking at is a two-stage machining process here, where they cut, and this is where that concavity ends here. Like you can see, it gets deeper and then shallows out.
Yep.
So they cut it sideways through this, and then it's almost as if they ran a circular saw this way, and they just pushed the block through like this. So it was digging out that profile as it went through. But there's this, it's hard to see in the photos, but it's entirely there. And again, you see the striations in the stone from the cutting mechanism.
Right, the little grooves.
This is very sophisticated machining stone. Like, I don't know what the purpose was for this, whether this was, it could have been part of a box, they didn't cut all the way through the stone. I don't know. I mean,
we're blowing Steven's mind.
I mean, I've got endless examples of this, and I mean, I like this one too. Like, but you can see it's just been, and you actually look close to, you can actually see the striations, like the individual cut lines. So it gets really interesting with this because, you know, a lot of these saw marks, the basalt ones, and again, basalt being probably as hard, if not a little harder than granite, are in what is basalt pavements to the east of the Great Pyramid, and it's on the sides because they would finish the top and it was perfectly flat. In fact, it's a wondrous application of stonework. But over the years and millennia, it's been falling apart. In fact, they even built back in the day. They built a road. They had a road over it. They literally put down a road over the top of the basalt pavement. They've taken the road away now. But at the sides of this thing where it's falling apart, you can see where they were rough shaping the blocks. Right? There was different types of tools. It seems to me. The quarry, there was the scoop marks in the quarry. They were looking to remove stone quickly. They didn't care. It wasn't precise. They're like scooping stuff out to get out as much material as possible so they can get the block out. Then they had the rough shaping of stone, where they were cutting out the kind of the general dimensions of the block, and we might be looking at that with this, where they're just cutting on the side and okay, we want to get this down to this point. And then there was a capability to just perfectly finish the stone, like fine polishing, fine machining, doing those fine little touches to get those precision surfaces, and then a polish to make it kind of like that mirror finish. So there's different levels, and these were done in different places. And what's interesting with the stone cutting is that we don't have a good explanation for this. There's tube drilling kind of falls under this too, but the stone cutting is like the explanation is that it was grinding with like a copper drag saw, like it's like a V-shaped copper bar. You put sand and water and you grind and grind and grind. So you just sit there and grind and grind and grind. And the problem with that is that it doesn't leave.
There's videos of this, right?
Yeah. Mark
Do this.
Lehner and it's I mean, it's a good experiment. There's nothing wrong with the experiment. So Mark Lehner and a guy named Dennis Stocks. Mark Lehner's a famous Egyptologist. Dennis Stocks is an experimental Egyptologist who does actually do these sort of experiments, and it's great because we get some data from his work. But there's a few problems with it. One is it doesn't leave the same signature. Secondly, you don't get overcuts. You don't get these narrow cuts like these. You're not going to get this sort of stuff with that because it's V-shaped, right? And based on that data, though, from Dennis and other people, we have data on how long it takes to do this, and it's something like let's round it off and say this thing is a little tiny bit over, but about 2 millimeters per hour.
With that grinding technique?
Yeah, and that varies based on the length of the cut. Obviously, the longer the cut, the slower you go. So 2 millimeters, roughly 2.5, whatever millimeters per hour. It's very, very slow is the takeaway. And at the same time, you lose copper. Like the grinding, because it's the quartz sand, it's doing the cutting, the copper's kind of, you could use horn or potentially even wood, but even using copper, you lose copper at a tremendous rate. So you lose almost as much, if not more, copper than you're actually getting from cutting the stone. And it's a very slow rate. So with that slow rate, you'd have to grind away for hours to get these sort of overcuts that we see, for starters. So it's and again, as you said, you're probably not gonna make that mistake and sit there and keep doing that mistake for hours and hours to get an overcut. Like, all right, Johnson, you're in trouble. Like, and secondly, I have yet to do the math, but I plan on, I'd love to do this, and I've said it a few times now, but I want to scale this up to see what is at an industrial scale, can the stuff, because we know, you can kind of calculate how many blocks, how much granite was cut. You can probably get to a rough figure of how much tonnage of granite, say just at Gyges, or maybe just on the Middle Pyramid complex, I don't know. But, you know, Chris Dunn kind of calculated it, just to give you an example, there's a box inside the Middle Pyramid, right? There's a box in the room, kind of like the box in the King's Chamber. It's a little bigger, a little longer, like maybe 8 feet long, 3 or 4 feet wide. And based on Dennis Stocks' experiments, purely to make the primary cuts on that block of granite, so soon you quarry the granite, it takes God knows how long, but just to make like the north, south, east, west, top and bottom cuts, right, to shape the box, using the data that we've got from guys like Dennis Stocks, would take something like 267 days of continuous grind, 24 hours a day, just to shape that one box. And that doesn't include hollowing it out, because again, it's a single piece box, right? It's been hollowed out, it's been finished perfectly. You've got tube drills in it. It's all shaped and decorated, and there's who knows how much work in doing that as well. So it's just like, you really think you could scale up and do like hundreds of thousands of tons worth of granite work using this? And where's all the copper dust? Where is it? Like there's tons and tons and tons and tons of copper must have been used to do this. And yeah, so
Didn't they analyze that famous core, Petrie's core, and I think in Chris's book, I think I read this also, where they took a modern day tube drill, and they basically estimated, based on the rings going around the outer edge of the tube, the core that came out, that they estimated that the drill would have been 500 times more powerful than
it's so based on this, so in fact this is Petrie's core. I've got another image of it here. This one, same thing. Let's go. So yeah, that's Petrie's core number 7 there. So it's so Petrie, and it's called Petrie's core number 7 because Flinders Petrie discovered it, and it's exhibit number 7 on his, and this is the one that's been studied. So he looked at it, and he determined that this spiral groove that's on the stone has what you'd call a 1 in 60 penetration rate, right? So if you take that, if you unwind that spiral travel, you stick it out in a straight line, for every 60 inches of horizontal travel, you're getting an inch of vertical travel, 1 in 60.
Right, okay.
Chris Dunn has since, I think, refined that a bit. It's not quite as deep, it's a little less than 1 in 60, it's in the ballpark. And yeah, so based, and then when you compare that to our modern tools, that's it essentially rounds out to being about 500 times greater penetration rate into stone than we can achieve. And that's not to say that it may have moved very slowly doing this, or our stuff spins really fast, so it's not penetrating it as fast per, you don't get a 1 in 60 penetration rate, but our stuff can still maybe cut the stone pretty quickly, but the actual penetration rate based on the motion of the drill isn't anything like what we're seeing in the stone here, which is crazy. And there are a number of these cores. I've talked a lot about this core, as has Chris, and I'm sure when you get Chris in, he'll talk about it too. But I consider the case is closed. Like they did a latex mold of it. He has proven without any doubt that it's a spiral groove. The problem has always been the claim that it's a spiral groove. That's the one thing that no one in, I guess, mainstream Egyptology will admit, and they go to great lengths to try and obfuscate this idea that it's a spiral groove. But it has been definitively proved by the Petrie Museum, no less, and Chris Dunn, who were both responsible for the latex core experiment, which is this one. So they made they made a latex core of it, right? So this is this latex mold. Chris stamped the latex mold with these notches, cut it open with these notches, and then here's just showing you the notch detail in these blow-ups next to these little arrows, right? So you can draw a straight line between these notches, which is the horizontal line, okay? The straight lines are the horizontal line between the notches, same spot. So it goes to the bottom of the notch, it goes to the bottom of the notch, same down here, bottom of the notch. And then what you're seeing is these dotted lines are tracing the individual spiral or individual grooves. And in every case that we look at here, it starts above the line and it ends up below the line. So it is spiral, right? So it's higher here, it's lower here. It's higher here, it's lower here, etc., etc. geometrically proves this is a spiral groove. That said,
And the length between each groove is exactly the same, right?
the width,
Oh, that's what I meant.
not really. That it seems, well, it's Petrie described it as a drunken screw. There are some crossover. It seems to have been more than one cutting point. So there was multiple cutting points. So there might have been some crossover. And you know, I people speculate all day about this. It is, and the other thing to note about this is that it's actually tapered. So it's tough to see. You can kind of see it. See how it's tapered?
Right. Yep.
Right. So it narrows down, and this thing's upside down. So this is probably where it's fatter at the bottom. It's upside down. It snaps off here. And so you've got to imagine that the holes that they come out of are straight, right? And it's tapered. So it tells us that the tool itself was probably tapered, which means that it's shaped like this. So as it goes down, it's cutting down, it's cutting down, it's cutting down. It's cutting on all surfaces. And then, so a lot of this is where people say, well, you know, this groove could have been made when they retracted the tool, like it unscrewed itself. I'm like, that isn't how it would work if it was tapered. So if it's tapered, it's going to conform, the granite's conforming to the shape of the tool, and then the second you move it up at all, it loses contact with the stone because it's the angle changes, right? It's narrower at the top and it's wider at the bottom. So once you get down and you're finished, you lift it up a bit, and then all of a sudden the tool's going to be wider right at that point when you lift it up. So it's not actually touching the stone. It doesn't unscrew. It just lifts out. It can't. I don't think unscrewing it or removing the tool will give you the spiral groove. Plus, look, it takes quite a lot of force to cut into granite like this. It's not just a simple. You're not scratching granite and leaving a deep groove like we see in these tubes. It's not just in the. It's not just in the drills, but we see it in these holes too. You have these deep grooves in the holes, and you see this all over the place with many.
Now, is that an example of like them doing a core drill used to split a piece of stone?
Well, I don't think it's used to split a piece of stone so much as they were sought out to then split stone. You know what I'm saying? Like they were. I think the people that were quarrying the blocks were looking for these, and then they would try and split them along the angle of the tube drill. You know what I'm saying? Along the axis of the tube drill. You see it. There's lots of complete holes like that haven't been split, and in fact, you see on the back of the stone, you see that dashed line, which is a. I mean, that's a technique that started. I mean, they were the earliest. We know they were using it in like the New Kingdom, but these tube drill holes go back way further, and the oldest types we don't see that quarrying method way back in the day. It's like the oldest quarrying method seems to be the scoop method at the quarry, which is kind
Like
of
an ice cream scoop.
Yeah. But I think they were looking for them. Like, for example, here's a giant tube, right? This is the 9-inch one at Karnak. And this stone's been split along its axis.
Right. So later civilizations found these things and used that to try to.
Yeah, because it's a natural weakness of the stone, and you can split them. So you see a lot of tube drills that are in fact split. But you see plenty that are whole as well, and when we know they're whole originally because we have the drill cores.
Can we look at some pictures of these scoop marks?
Yeah. Actually, this is a good point. Yeah, the ones I have. Let's just go straight to that.
And also, I forgot to ask you, what do you speculate these saw blades could have been made of?
It's less maybe what they were made of than what technology they were using. I mean, you know, Petrie speculated that it could have been. He's like, diamond would fit the bill, you know, like it's because he was looking at a bronze embedded with gemstones or something. But he's like, there's no evidence for diamond use. And he's right, there's no evidence for diamond use in Egypt. We see no diamonds. It's not written about.
Would there be leftover fragments of diamonds?
Yeah, but you'd find something. There's literally been zero. And as far as gemstones go, as far as gemstones go, the dynastic Egyptians sort of prized coloured stones. So diamonds wouldn't have been precious from that perspective. I mean, who knows? Maybe they did use them, they just don't have any evidence for it. But I don't know what it was using. It could have been any corundum or hardened substance, but it could have. Like I look at the stuff, I don't think there was pure mechanical force involved. I think there's something else going on. Well, that's the speculation.
From the stones?
There's who knows? Were they changing the molecular properties of the stone? Were they using ultrasonics? Were they? I mean, you have to go back to the legends.
Plasmoids?
Have you ever heard of? Well, It could have been plasmoids. I don't know. I mean, this is where we speculate. That's why I think it's interesting to be open-minded about what we see on these sites and research it as best we can. Let's use our best tools. Let's microscopically analyze the rock. Let's look at it with being open-minded to any possibility, because we might learn something. You know, I think you go back in time, the legend of the Shamir is very interesting. You ever heard this story? Like the Solomon's Temple, Shamir and all this. So it's, well, the Shamir, and I'm not that well versed in this. You should really have Russ and Kyle, the
guys.
Snake Bros.
The Snake Bros. Yeah,
they would be
a
great
guests. Reach out to those guys.
Fantastic. And Russ really knows this stuff inside out. But so there's stories in, I think it's associated with King Solomon, about the stories of something called a Shamir, which it essentially, think of it as like a lightsaber that just cuts through stone. Lets people cut through very hard stone. It's sometimes described as a worm. But there's this consistent story of this artifact called a Shamir that is like allegedly would let you, I like to think of it as like this lightsaber that just cuts through stone, and people really hard stuff comes out of history. So it's like, was this left over from these times? I don't know. And I try not.
Thinking about it in terms of diamond blades, though, is like, it's like thinking about it, looking in the mirror, like we can't assume that they did shit the way that we do shit, right? This is what we've been talking about with Randall for the past few days.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's the right approach. Like, it's a tempting and natural thing to look at a problem. We look at these challenges and we go, this is how we would do it, fit it into our box. And again, I just think that there's avenues of technology that we are yet to learn about, that we will know more about in time. And I think it's hard to do, but it's like, here's our perspective and here's everything we know, but some of the answers might be out here. Like, it's just, and that's what being open-minded about it, and not just dismissing stuff and scoffing at it, and then researching it with some of those possibilities in mind. We might even learn something eventually from it. That's what I want to do. People always like, what is it? What's the speculation of how it does? You can speculate all over the place. Chris Dunn's new book, if you've got to it, the Serapeum chapter.
Yeah, I'm like a quarter of the way through it. I gotta finish it.
He does some amazing speculation. I'm not going to spoil it.
Really?
Oh, guy, I love it. He sent me the Serapeum chapter because I'd helped him with some stuff for it before he wrote it, and I'm writing it like a recommendation for it. So I've got the book too. It comes out early next New Year, January 24. Yeah, for people.
Get them salts, baby.
And then and he does. I love where he goes with it. But it's with speculation. The world. It's an imagination at that point.
Does he talk about these lightsabers?
I haven't seen him mention specifically the Shamir. He's talking about more about a potential technological application for the boxes.
Oh, a technological application.
Yeah, like what, and so
that's something I've always thought about too. Yeah.
So here's another way to think of it, and I like this idea too, is that, because this relates to, he does talk about this, and this isn't giving the game away here, but it's like, if you consider the idea, you heard of like the concept of an assembler.
Like an assembler?
Assembler. Like, this is, imagine we get nanotech down to the point. And this is entirely plausible if you just project technology forward, where you create these microscopic machines that can essentially assemble themselves, or they can, almost like a von Neumann probe or something like that, but at the tiniest level, where you can use molecular it's like a self-replicating probe. Imagine you send, and some interesting books been written on that topic. Yeah, it's like you send a probe out into space, but it has the capability to replicate itself, just by using the material that it finds, and then project forward 1,000 years and see what happens to it. But imagine you get to the point where we have these microscopic machines they're assemblers that can take molecular material, even at the atomic level, and assemble things, and even replicate themselves. So you could build anything, but it's being done with technology that's so small you can't see it. That's this concept. It's been proposed by a number of sci-fi authors and people that have thought about technology. Yeah. And it's like that's one scale of things. And the other scale of things to think about as well, if you go out and you think about Dyson spheres and things like that are almost galactic in scope, or the size of a solar system in terms of a machine that does a particular thing. It's just an interesting way of thinking and looking at technology. We look at it and go, here's a box, and how would we cut this box and make this box? But it's possible whether it's plausible or not, I don't know, but it's possible that the answers to some of these questions could be so small we can't see them, or so large we can't comprehend them. Like, that's just the nature of technology. Like, we just don't, you can throw simulation theory into that too, the idea that we're all just part of some simulation running on the computers of the future. But it's just projections of technology. This is all pure speculation. So that's one of the challenges with speculation, is that it becomes this just endless imagination of possibilities. But I do try to focus on sort of following the evidence and looking at what some of the answers might be based on the evidence that we have in front of us, and it's fun to speculate. And I'm in the process of writing a book too, and I will speculate, give my speculation in there as well about what it might be. But I always try to be real clear about when I'm speculating. Because as soon as you speculate, people are like, look, it's crazy. You think the moon's a spaceship or something.
Oh yeah, we did our last podcast. We were talking about the moon, and somebody took a video and made some crazy reaction video.
Oh yeah, gotta love that react model.
I gotta pee real quick.
All right, they've really figured out, their construction guys.
Is it 2 guys?
Russ and Kyle.
Okay.
They've really figured out some really cool shit on how some of this architecture might have been made, because these blocks that go around the corners, how in like Gyges the blocks kind of go around the corner, where they cut and then they go around. They're not like cut just bricks in the corner, they curve around. But they've sort of worked out how that was probably done, and they have a really good method for showing people. They've made some really astute observations on how the pyramids were built and how these big pyramid structures were built.
And do those guys go out there a lot?
Go with me, yeah. They come with me next year, and I've taken them out twice. Yeah. The 2 times I've been to Egypt, they went with me. Yeah. So I like to tour with them because we also jam.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, we play. Those guys are fantastic, particularly Kyle, amazing musician. I use some of it. If you watch that Karnak video, the song at the end. Did you get to the end of it? Like it's this
video?
The most recent one, Karnak. Right at the end, there's like a music. There's like a song at the end.
Yeah, the last like 10 minutes of it is the song. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
That's Kyle's music.
Oh no shit! Really? Okay.
Yeah. So we jam and they're good. And I'm not. They're more they help me to manage the group, and then also they're just more social and personable than me most of the time.
Yeah.
A bit more serious. I'm able to have conversations, but those guys are funny. Yeah. So it's great. We work together really well.
Yeah, but one of the things, like getting back to those boxes, I wonder, like, was the technology just so hyper advanced that like making something that precise wasn't a big deal? Like if some culture came along a million years from now and be like, how did they make this bottle so perfect and smooth? Like, not because there was a purpose, just because it was easy. So like those boxes, was it just really fucking easy to do that? And the pyramid too, or was it for a specific function? Like, how can you make that box functional?
Well, there is a relation, and I have a long video on precision, and there is, and I said this the other day, I think too, as well, that there's a relationship between precision and function. You don't develop precision. Developing precision costs money. Like it costs resources. You only do that for a functional return. And when you look at the development of precision in the modern world, it kind of stems out of the need for like old naval cannons to shoot straight. The old days, you would cast a cannon and then fire it while it's hot and go, well, I guess that's the barrel, and hopefully that thing shoots straight now. And then they were like, well, we can make more accurate weapons if we actually, maybe cast it and then carve out and machine, like slowly use a water wheel and turn out, a cannon barrel to make it shoot straighter. And then they started to draw that relationship. Then we needed to make chronographers, accurate timepieces that help with navigation, like longitude. We talked about longitude earlier, but it's very difficult to measure. Latitude's okay, you can use the sun for that, but longitude, you need accurate timepieces to be able to know where you are on that east-west time frame. And in fact, the way we used to do it, it was you'd go to where you wanted, and we'd basically move in right angles. Like if people would sail to get somewhere based on navigational maps, it was called like running down a westing or running down an easting. You would get to where you wanted on the latitude and then go that way until you hit what you needed to, because you knew you could head east or west, but you weren't sure how far you had gone. And it wasn't until the end of the 17th century, essentially, that we developed accurate enough timepieces to be able to navigate using longitude effectively. then progression or precision progresses into the industrial age and steam engines and the need to create containment vessels for pressure and that's now in the modern world we've got 7 Newton meter processes that we're developing silicon on and you're packing millions and millions of transistors and complex logical circuitry into a tiny little footprint. But that costs billions of dollars to do, and we do it because there's a functional return on it. So a long way around of saying that you develop precision when you're chasing a particular functional return. And I think it's one of the indications to me when you look at some of these precision objects, particularly the more like the regular ones. The boxes are a good example. I think they were functional, and potentially some of the structures and even the sights were functional. And I think in order to get that functional return, they needed to make these things with precision. Now, in terms of the bottle that we looked at and industrial design, once you have a manufacturing system that supports precision, precision's what you get. Like today, you buy a toaster. It's going to be industrial design on a computer, and it's going to be made in a manufacturing system that is just by its nature very precise. Like it's all there's no panel gaps on it. And in cars, look at the panel gaps between different panels on cars today versus in the 1960s. It's much better. Like you don't need it, but it's a result of the manufacturing system. So that's also an explanation that I like to use when it comes to the more abstract artifacts like statues that show tremendous precision, that look like they've been designed and then they've been executed in a manufacturing system that gives you that precision. It gives you that perfect symmetry. It gives you these features that are like kind of hard to explain in isolation. But I do believe that they developed that capability to get some sort of function. What that function is, I don't know. Like that's where the speculation comes.
Yeah.
From. What was the function that the boxes did? This crazy correlation of these boxes in these pyramids or these boxes in these underground structures. The Serapeum are an example. The pyramids are an example. Even across the Giza Plateau, the Osiris Shaft, you see these boxes underground and in these big structures. I don't know, but I get the sense they're functional. There's infrastructure on these sites. At Saqqara, at Abu Sir, at Dashur, at Giza, we have evidence for very complex systems of what I can only call channeled blocks, these U-shaped blocks that are below the floor level. So you have these floor tiles that might be a couple feet thick. In some cases, they're even cased on top of that, but right down beneath that stuff, you have this infrastructure of essentially piping. It runs all under these sites. It's all over the place at Abu Sir. We see evidence for it, Giza, Saqqara, like all these old kingdom sites. Not something you ever see on the later sites. These are the oldest of sites, have these very strange and complex, essentially either it could have been housing piping, it could have been housing cables, it could have been, we don't know, but and sometimes it's not all gravity fed, like sometimes they'll run all the way down beneath causeways to where there would have been water, and then it runs all over the site in complex patterns. At Abu Sir, it's probably the best example, that there's Y joins and all these other things running beneath the floor, and sometimes using fairly exotic stone types like granite or white calcite, alabaster. And a lot of those stones show evidence for machining. There's a great example at Saqqara of machined alabaster U-shaped channeled blocks that are beneath the floor tiles, and it's a real mystery. We don't know why. I mean, it's like if you ask the explanation for what this white calcite or alabaster was used, it was prized for its white color. It's an expensive stone to try and use. It's difficult to obtain. Alabaster and calcite comes from extinct and calcified natural springs. Like these are millions of years ago were natural springs that calcified over time. And to get white calcite, you actually have to dig all the way to the source of the natural spring. So it's wherever that was. It's not like an easy stone to get to. Further out from the source, you get sort of yellow calcite and brown calcite, but they were using white calcite. And Egyptologists say that they prize that stuff for its color, for its clean color, or sometimes it can be transparent. In that case, what is this stuff doing buried beneath the floor level where it's never going to be seen? Like it's literally a stone type that gets used in this underground infrastructure that's never seen. So they must have been using it for some other purpose. Like I think some of these stone types that you see, particularly in the really megalithic stone sites, might have had a functional purpose, like choosing particular types of stone, like basalt, granite, limestone, white calcite, even quartzite in some places, and in particular orders. And there's plenty of other indications that there was something else going on at these sites. I mean, my last video I did on Karnak Temple, there's some really interesting, there's an area of Karnak that it's normally off limits. Again, we know the right people to get in and see it, and I love showing people this stuff every year. Is there's a part of Karnak that where the granite's literally crumbling apart. It's granite diorite. It's something's happened to the stone here, where it's like the inside of the stone has swelled. It's like it's undergone a transformation and it's expanded. And it's almost around the edge of the stone. There's a couple of inches of where the stone is in good condition, but because the inside's like transformed and expanded, it's put this pressure on the outside, and it's cracked all of the outside. And in some places, it's like falling apart, like it's cracked it whole blocks apart, and then the inside of the blocks just crumbling
from the inside out.
Yeah, inside out. And
so wild.
And then we see that also at Abu Sir and other places where you have like crumbling basalt, and this happens in nature.
Right.
But it takes literally millions of years of exposure. Basalt and these other igneous stones that are formed in the heat of like lava and formed over millions of years of compression and heat in the earth. I mean, you can expose them to millions of years of sunlight, and okay, they're going to erode and degrade over time, but we're talking about cut surfaces of stone that are doing that. And they're originally finished. And so at Abu Sir, for example, you have basalt that's been cut, and then it was cased in limestone. So it's like, you know, it was surrounded by limestone, but those mating surfaces are now crumbling and falling apart. Now, who knows? It's pure speculation, but was it heat cycling? Was there something going through it? I mean, I do have a video where we were playing with like a very high voltage electromagnetic sort of field generator device, and we were testing different types of stone, and they have different electromagnetic properties. Like granite doesn't do anything. You can get arcs coming off limestone, and then there's somewhat of an arc coming off basalt. So they do have different properties under different conditions. And you know, is it possible that those were some of these properties of the stone were things that were being chased by the builders for a functional purpose? I love these ideas, and I know Chris Dunn is exploring some of those in some of his theories and his work. He certainly knows a lot more about it than I do. Again, I'm trying to illustrate that there may be reasons for that type of stone, and some of those properties might have something to do with a possible purpose. So it's like, why would we not research that further? Why would we not apply ourselves and try and see, you know, is there anything here that could possibly provide an answer, that provide a clue for why this was done this way?
Let's look at those scoop marks.
Okay. So you know what? Let me just give me a second.
Now, when it comes to these scoop marks, is there any sort of idea or explanation on how they were made, either by the Egyptologists that are there, or by you?
I mean, yeah, the explanation for them is, you know, is that they were this pounding stone. This is the pounding stone explanation here.
I love the part of one of your videos where you guys are filming that lady with the pounding stone. She's trying to pound the ground.
Yeah, he said, "Watch out, you'll break it." Yeah, let me pull up this, and then we'll go to.
I also want to talk about Yusuf.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that. That guy sounds super interesting. In fact, they let him like run around there and do guides, guide people on tour, and explain all this stuff that goes counter to the narrative.
Yeah, Yusuf's great. I mean, I love Yusuf in just the fact that he has, you know, he's such a knowledgeable guy, and I do. He's the greatest. He's my brother. I sort of hit the jackpot when I met him, and he's a superstar for teaching people. It's what he does. It is absolutely what he does, and I will swear to God I'll find his pictures here in a second.
You said Yusuf has lived right there his entire life since he was a kid.
Yes. Yeah, Yusuf. So his dad, Yusuf's dad was Hakim El Ayawan. He's a really famous indigenous wisdom keeper and guide. He's unfortunately wested since then, or he's passed. He was the guide that was used by guys like Graham Hancock, Robert Bovall, John Anthony West. Hakeem's well known. There's lectures you can find from him online. He's got, at Yusuf's shop, he's sort of got pictures of Hakeem from all over the world. He met all sorts of interesting figures. He's kind of been really well known, as a guide, and really interesting guy. So Yusuf kind of followed in his father's footsteps. He doesn't believe everything. He doesn't believe everything that Hakeem does. And if you're interested in Hakeem's theories, there's an author named Stephen Mailer who wrote a book, Land of Osiris, I think it is, and he was Hakeem's student. Hakeem was the founder of this modern, I guess you'd call it chematology, this theory, chemet being an ancient word for Egypt. And he has a lot of interesting theories, but again, I wouldn't say that Yusuf subscribes to all. He has his own theories. He's done his own work. Yusuf's he's a practicing stonemason, so he works with this material. He's a very talented musician as well. Works with this material with his hands. He's very well versed in traditional Egyptology. Like, he knows all of the rules. He can read hieroglyphs. He grew up literally across the street from the Sphinx. In fact, it's still where his family store is. It's in Nazlet El Samam, which is a little village that's right near the entrance, the Sphinx entrance to the Giza Plateau. And the Awen family store is right there, and his balcony up the top, you're looking straight at the Sphinx and the Middle Pyramid complex. It's really cool.
What are some of the theories of that guy came up with?
Hakeem?
Yeah.
Hakeem has one of the things I can talk about, he thinks there was acoustical properties to a lot of these sites, that some of these were sound hospitals. In fact, he even ran one for quite a while. And they had, anecdotally at least, very good results. They would take people to these ancient places, into some specific areas that have resonant properties, and they would, I don't know exactly what they were doing in there, but they had people that recovered from illnesses. And at least anecdotally, from what I've heard, it worked. And then, as the story goes, as it's been told to me, Zahi Hawass actually shut them down. He stopped them from doing it.
Who was Zahi Hawass again?
Well, Zahi Hawass was the long-term head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, or the Department of Antiquities and Tourism, I think it's called now. He's notorious kind of figure he had that debate with Graham Hancock where he kind of lost the cool. He's probably the world's most famous Egyptologist, certainly Egyptian Egyptologist, world famous guy. Written a bunch of books. I talked about him a few times. I've met him a few times. In fact, with the last trip to Egypt, we ran into him like 4 times.
Really?
Yeah. He was just there. He was at the.
Is he a nice guy?
He can be a charming guy. I suspect he probably. Look, I don't know him personally. I know he's treated a lot of people very fairly. He's probably been less fair to others. I had no problem with him. I was just on a tour, and this was the Graham Hancock tour where he was supposed to be debating him, and we spent a day with him. And I think he's certainly had a history of being quite, in the past, it's strange, he really attacks a few of the alternative authors, Graham. In particular, Robert Bovall, he doesn't like. He's pretty fond of saying that, people are just charlatans trying to make money, and they're all pyramidians and stuff like this. But back in the day, though, he was quite friendly, and in fact, I've seen a picture of Zahi and John Anthony West and Robert Bovall and Graham Hancock kind of arm in arm at the Sphinx enclosure, and he certainly has enabled some interesting research to happen privately a few times. I had a video about the Sphinx temple that started to get into some of that with, there's an interesting correlation in at least these allegations of connection between him and the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Do you know who Edgar Cayce is? The American prophet. Okay, so this is an interesting story. So Cayce was a prophet, and a lot of people made a lot of money based on his predictions for the stock market back in the day, and he ended up he had these visions and wrote a couple of books, and one of his visions entailed you've probably heard of the Hall of Records, right?
Yes.
This idea. Okay, so a lot of that comes from Cayce. He talks about the fact that there's a Hall of Records in one of the locations. There's 3 of them, I think, and one of them is under the paw of the Sphinx, and then there's another one that's supposedly under, I think it was, I mentioned it earlier, it's Mount Nemrut, like the Nemrut tumulus pile, which is an insane site that I also saw for the first time this year. But so he's that foundation. It's the ARE. I think it's the Association for Research and Enlightenment. Is essentially the Casey Foundation, and they've kind of been involved in private expeditions to Gyges. They've been looking, right? They're trying to satisfy Casey's prediction about the Hall of Records, and they have been essentially digging and looking around at Gyges and these other places since like the 1970s. Now, Zahi's very much against anything Atlantis related. He's like, there's no ancient civilization. So in publicly facing, like he decries any of that type of thing. But he did also grant like the Casey Foundation like a 5-year permit to do unlimited, essentially digging and excavation on the Giza Plateau, including in the Great Pyramid. And so it's on one hand you sort of decrying all of this
Hey guys, I'm really sorry.
anything
I will
lost
be back
civilization,
in
and
like
on the
5
other hand, you're
minutes or
enabling
less.
essentially an organisation whose stated goal is to prove out Atlantis that there was a Hall of Records and everything like that. Not only that, but Edgar Casey's son, Hugh Lynn Casey, he wrote a book, and in that book he claims, and I will say that Zahi Hawass has denied this, that he claims that the Edgar Casey Foundation funded his education, like they paid for his education at Pennsylvania University. They found, like he literally says in the book, and this isn't me saying it, he found that they found Zahi, who was a site inspector at the time, like not like lower rank kind of guy, but he was pliable and agreeable, and they thought he was someone they could work with, so they funded his education with Mark Lehner, who's been a long-term partner of Zahi Hawass, and that went through the Pennsylvania University. They got his doctorate, and for sure it's verified that Zahi has had engagements with the ARE plenty of times. He's gone and spoken at their events. He's been part of it. He goes back there and lectures quite often. So, it's just strange to me that he's associated with an organisation like the ARE, which has done these secretive digs, and there's strong evidence, as documented by Robert Boval, which might be one of the reasons that Zahi doesn't like him so much. He's documented the fact that Zahi's been enabling kind of secret expeditions, digging and drilling around the Sphinx since the 1970s. Like there's kind of one acknowledged drilling effort that they made to look under the Sphinx. I think it happened in the mid-90s, thereabouts, and they were drilling under the body of the Sphinx. And the stated goal was, we're checking the integrity of the limestone bedrock given the water tables rising, blah, blah, blah. But there's plenty of evidence for a bunch of other drilling that's happened, like as far back as the late 1970s. And there's pictures of Hugh Lynn Casey and Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass from those times, like the young Zahi. They're all together. And then in the mid to late 90s, he enabled something called the Shore Expedition, which was Dr. Joseph Shore, a couple other people, Boris Said was one of them, but they're all ARE members. They're all part of the Casey Foundation. None of them are Egyptologists or archaeologists, but he gave them a 5-year open permit to do whatever they wanted up at the Giza Plateau. And they did a bunch of stuff. They did a bunch of excavations around the Sphinx, and Zahi was involved in it, and they even made a documentary that's never been seen. So Boris Said, who was a filmmaker, he's also since died. And I dug into like these old Art Bell radio episodes from the 90s where he was talking about it. He had a falling out with I think Joseph Shaw, the guy that was funding the experiment or the expedition. And just based on this fallout, the documentary kind of went into limbo and it's never been seen, but apparently it's part of it, and they had gone in under the Sphinx and looked at chambers. And Zahi at the time, and Boris said they found chambers beneath the Sphinx, like they 100% found chambers beneath the Sphinx. By the way, also a claim made by John Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schock when they analysed the area with ground penetrating radar. They found chambers beneath the Sphinx. And at the time, when they were doing this experiment, Zahi said, we've got this incredible announcement and discovery. It's going to shake up the world's history. We're going to change what we know about the sort of the structure of the Giza Plateau and what's down below the ground, and he's teasing it. And then this documentary kind of went away, and he's never said anything about it since. And in fact, to this day, denies that there's any chambers or any structures or things beneath the Sphinx. If asked, he'll say, well, they found natural fissures in the rock and there's nothing else, which is nonsense. I mean, Boris Said's on record saying, no, I've seen it. Like been down there and seen them.
Been in them?
Well, it's kind of what he says, yeah. But it's very secret. It's all privately organised and permitted by and so there's an interesting history. I think if there are chambers down there, and if there's anything in them, or there was, it's long gone. I think it's been pilfered, or it's been taken. It's not public. I mean, there's also a chance that if there was ever anything in there, the Egyptians, or the dynastic Egyptians, might have taken it. There's a couple of people with theories along those lines, like Ramsay Bazada wrote a book, I think, called Beneath the Sphinx, that talks about the idea that the Hall of Records may well have been there, but it was discovered by the old Egyptians who took it, and then there's some evidence that they were replicating some of that information and knowledge through a particular cult that persisted through dynastic Egypt. And it's an interesting story that he puts together. It is new data, but it seems likely that they're indicating some really interesting information, like the spacing of planets, the relative distance of planets in the solar system, like all this cosmic information that it seems like they didn't really know what to do with, but it was information that they've gotten from, this trove of data from a lost ancient civilization, and it's just them were replicating it and kind of recording it down in their own way. And there's all these interpretations of this stuff that seems to match all of what we know about the solar system and the structure. So it kind of goes, there's all these different directions that stuff goes in. And I've been meaning to do a more dedicated sort of deep dive into that shore expedition and the history of secret digs around the Sphinx, because, the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple, it is like it's described as a gateway. Like there is a lot of legitimate reasons to think that there's something below that structure in that part of the Giza Plateau. Like, even the way it's historically depicted and talked about from ancient Egypt, like they often, when they draw out the Sphinx, they show it on a pedestal. Like the Sphinx is always depicted in these steles, most of the time, on top of a pedestal. And in many of those pedestals, there's a doorway, and then the Sphinx is often described as a doorway or as a guardian, guarding a doorway and into the underworld or something like this. And
sorry, dude. Sorry about that, man.
Sphinx,
I might take down the AI. It's getting kind of annoying.
But you have to imagine there's a
I'm not even watching it. It's getting kind of annoying. It's just too much.
The Sphinx Temple.
I'll make it small again.
And the Sphinx is behind it. Now, the Sphinx Temple has been shut for public access for I don't know how long. Like, Yusuf, he's in his 40s. He's never been in there until we got to go in there on one trip. We were probably one of the first groups to ever, and thanks again to the people I know in Egypt who arranged this through the Ministry of Antiquities to finally open up access to the Sphinx Temple as a special permission. We went in there. Very interesting structure. Amazing. There's amazing granite cornice blocks and all this stuff. But if you would imagine it back in the day with its cornice blocks, which is
nice and done. Alright, since you're still here and I left you for like an hour, we're going to listen to it on stream.
Which makes the Sphinx Temple potentially the location for the pedestal of the Sphinx.
Maybe, if you want me to or not.
To the underworld. Now,
if you don't want me to, I
Temple,
won't.
when you go in there is indeed evidence for shafts that go down. There's these giant. There's like an 80-ton channeled granite block in the ground beneath the floor tiles that have since been removed. That terminates at a shaft that goes down to we don't know where, that hasn't been cleared. But it obviously goes underground. And not only that, but out the front of the Sphinx Temple, if you walk back, if you're standing there at Giza and you're looking at it, it's where the seats are for the sound and light show. Sort of off in the corner, about 30 or 40 feet in front of the Sphinx Temple, there's a little concrete pad, and there's a metal tube sticking out of it.
Don't say.
Just sort of unobtrusively in the corner. That's where Zahi Hawass himself did a drilling experiment. So they drilled down like 150 feet. This is a limestone.
Oh, I know why.
Plateau, and at like 150 feet or 130, something like that, they hit granite. This drill hit granite and returned these shards and flakes of red granite from 130 feet below the ground, and there's not natural granite there. So what the hell is down there that deep, and it's made of granite?
No, that's okay. That can stay on the left.
Right. It goes on and on. Like you go halfway up the causeway, like connects the Sphinx and the Valley Temple to the Middle Pyramid complex. Right. It's this big causeway. It goes up to the pyramid. halfway up it is what's known as the Osiris shaft. Now this is 3 different levels that you can go into. Again, as a special permission, there's water at the bottom, but there's 3 chambers that go down to about 150 feet, and there's big granite boxes in them as you go down there. Right, and there's tunnels that literally lead off down the causeway that have never been explored at the bottom level.
Whatever, we'll play it.
And stuff, but they've never been explored. There's footage of when they did pump the water out.
You don't need to do. I need to make
it was like
this
Fox,
like.
I think it was on the Fox channel.
I know what I need
And
to
Zahi
do.
was down there with a reporter and saying, oh, this was the tomb of Osiris or whatever. And she's like, well, what about these tunnels? Zahi's like, no, we've never explored them. We sent a boy in and he couldn't get very far, but we've never looked at as to where they go. So, like, there's definitely underground chambers and infrastructure down there, and we honestly
Sorry,
don't
man.
know
I'm just trying to figure this out.
if they've been explored and if, you know, there's anything in there or if, you know, what's happened, which is...
What do you think his motivation would be to change his story on that and keep all this secret excavation secret and all this secret exploration and not to change the narrative? Like, what sort of motivations would he have?
I don't know. I mean, if you know, I think it's the typical. If there's any motivation, it's pure speculation. I'm not claiming this, or that I know it. And I'll just probably reiterate that Zahi's denied.
Oh, God. Where'd you get the vocals? That sounds sick, dude. Where'd you get the vocals, man? The echo. No, that's just... Interesting. With the original vocals, I understand. That's why it sounds a little weird. It's not because there's different elements. You just layered it, right? I understand. That's sick though. Nice instrumentals, bro. Sounds like a bass, like a real bass. And drum. It's nice, man.
That he has any connection to the area.
I like it.
Sure, he was involved in these expeditions. There's plenty of people who talk about him being involved in these expeditions.
Maracas, yeah, buddy. Yeah, man.
30 years ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, what motivates people, right? It's money and it's power and it's all these sort of things. I don't know. I don't know. And it's I don't like any real conspiratorial angle on these things in terms of, you know, they find stuff and is it hidden from us because it doesn't conform to the story? I don't know. I'd like to think not. I'd like to think that if they found stuff, they'd talk about it regardless of if it had a significant impact on the story of history. But
Well, doesn't he make money quite literally from people visiting Egypt and exploring?
yeah, I mean, he's made
tourism?
plenty of money. I mean, I don't know how directly. He's a very powerful figure in Egypt. I'd say this. He's also done a lot for Egyptology. I mean, he champions the returning of objects to Egypt, which I think is a great cause, particularly if they're in private hands and people can't see them. The stuff that gets, I mean, Egypt's been pilfered by everybody for so long.
Yeah, you were saying much of the stuff's been found in Israel, right?
Oh, it's all over the place. Yeah, all over the place. There's, yeah. I mean, there is stuff that I mean, you don't have to go back to just Israel, but you go back to the Americans, the French, the English. I mean, during all the periods of occupation of the last several hundred years, of anyone who's been involved in the governance of Egypt. I mean, you know, I think Matt Simpson just did a video, or Luke Cavins actually did a video talking about how the British Museum is essentially full of artifacts that were stolen from Egypt. I mean, one of the sticking points is that the original Rosetta Stone is in the British Museum. It's been there for like 200 years. But it's, you know, I'm like, if it's in a museum somewhere and people can see it, they have, people don't understand the scope of artifacts that have been found here too. There are warehouses absolutely full of this stuff in Egypt. Like, some of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings are like, they fill them up with all the artifacts they find in other places and lock the doors because it's essentially climate controlled. And I hope, and I've yet to see it, but they're building a giant new museum, or it should be just about done by now, the Grand Egyptian Museum, biggest museum in the world from what I understand it's going to be. And I really hope that they have enough space and real estate to show us all of the artifacts that they just haven't had the space to show. I mean, there's so much stuff in Egypt that's been taken from Egypt. And even then, even despite all of this, even the Egyptologists, and Zahi will say this as well, is that it's like 70% of it is still underneath the sands. Like, he thinks that we've only maybe uncovered 20 to 30% of what's out there. So there was, you know, there's a lot going on, and but yeah, look, I don't know. It's an interesting sort of story to dive into the history of some of these excavations, and like I said, it kind of goes back to my point about the pyramid earlier, where I hope that whatever they do, and I'm sure somebody's planning it, that they're going to go and try and look for this chamber. I would very much hope that it gets shared with the world. That's all I know. It's like, share that information, let everybody see it. I mean, it's part of everybody's history. You know, I don't care who makes money, but it's just like, I think a lot of people would be interested.
What is this right here?
So this is the obelisk.
Okay.
This is the unfinished obelisk, and you talk about scoop marks. There's a few of them on top of it.
Oh wow.
And in fact, you see some of the characteristic pounding stones there as well. And in fact, and there's some of these scoop marks are, you see on the right here, on the left of the thing as well, and then all the way down what do you call it, who's this man? One of my brain working here. The trench. There you go. I just needed to look at this one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so this one was never actually pulled out of the quarry, right? This was started and never completed.
That's right. Yeah, it's not actually. In fact, it's not. The trench isn't quite deep enough. Actually, look at some scoop marks here on the right here, on the wall. So what's interesting about the scoop marks, and I don't know if I have other examples in this particular.
Is there any explanation, like of how this could happen naturally? Those scoop marks, like from degradation?
It's not natural. It's definitely not natural. It's not degradation. So the explanation for this is that this was the quarrying technique. You see this on the quarries. You see it around the artifacts where they've been quarrying things, and it's not a natural phenomenon. 100%. They say it's been made by these dolerite pounding stones, which honestly it's one of the silliest theories that's out there. So they found at the site though, they found a lot of these dolerites are harder stone than granite. You know, you will eventually grind away and remove some granite if you pound away hard enough. And again, studies have been done on kind of the removal rate of stone using dolerite pounders, but I cover it in my video, one of my videos about the quarry. There's a lot that doesn't make sense when it comes to this particular quarry. And in fact, if I take a look at I have videos, I'm sure of that. Okay, so you can see a number of different quarrying techniques in play at the Aswan quarry, the oldest being.
How far is that obelisk from Giza Plateau?
About 500 miles.
Okay.
So that's generally the. So this is like the general characteristical layout of it. You see these scoop marks all over the place, right? They're all on the floor where they've been used to move stuff. You see those other forms of quarrying too. In higher layers, you'll see chiseling and you'll see wedge and chisel, but
You also have these test pits. Now, I probably have, this is probably not the best example, but so these test pits that go down, some of them 30, 40 feet, they're like cut straight down into the stone. They're like a, I don't know if I have a better example here. Most of my stuff on this is video, but, oh, here's one here. You go. So see, this is like a, that's put a grate over the top of this, and this is done using those scoop marks as well, which sort of starts to belie the challenge. Like, how do you get in there and pound and crouch down, and it's barely wide enough or broad enough for a person to stand in there, let alone get down on their, crouch down and pound it on the floor and then remove the material out. These go straight down, and what they're probably for is they're probably for testing the quality of the granite. Right? When you're looking for a giant single piece of granite, you're not going to find that at the surface of any granite outcrop, because the granite's inferior up there. It's going to have cracks, it's going to have defects. When you cut down into the core of these quarries, this is where the highest quality stone is. It's got the large quartz crystal inclusions, and that's where you can find stone of a quality good enough to cut like a single piece block that isn't going to break on the road. So these test pits would have been dug looking for like how deep do we have to go to get these blocks in, which opens up a whole bunch of other problems, because a lot of Egyptologists don't credit the Old Kingdom Egyptians with the ability to quarry granite. It's sort of ridiculous. And you see tons of, this is more the test pit here. These are really cool, but you can see how it was done.
Good God, dude.
Yeah, it's the quarry is really, really interesting. Here's some good scoop marks, actually. This is you start to see stuff. So in some areas, there's really interesting particular block. I probably have it here. Do I? Okay, this is probably the best indication of it. So it's tough to see. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So there's an unfinished piece that's not the big one, but there's one on the side. And so it's sort of cut out, and it goes in underneath. It goes in underneath the.
What's your wildest guess on when this was all done?
Oh, so I think some of the stuff is done. Wildest guess is, I mean, I would open up the range from 50,000. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily just before the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, put it that way. Like, it's a possibility that the civilization that might have done some of this might have been ended by the Younger Dryas. But I actually think, given the extension of the human timeline, given the possibility that it may not have been just us, it might have been other species of hominids potentially involved, I don't know. I open up that window to like potentially hundreds of thousands of years.
What do you mean other species of hominids?
Well, Denisovans, Neanderthals, we have a complex genetic history. So ourselves, our species is now out potentially 800, 900,000 years old. That's based on teeth morphology, studies into teeth morphology, studies into like when we split from a common ancestor with the Neanderthals, like our DNA train. From a fossil record, the oldest human remains are like 300,000 years old. But a couple of recent studies looking at the rates of dental evolution and our DNA put the window much further, like towards 1 million years, but 800,000, 900,000 years. We're also finding that our history is more complex. We have, the discovery of the Denisovans or the Denisovans is a fairly recent thing that gets a whole other species of hominid. And there's some evidence of tool use and even sophisticated tool use. There's a jade bracelet that is a Denisovan artifact that has drill holes in it. And the one other thing that I've learned recently that I always thought that like Neanderthals couldn't talk. Like that was, I always thought, our studies and what we found in Neanderthals, the larynx and the structure of their throat meant that they couldn't talk. I think that's recently been reversed. I think now there's evidence that they could in fact talk. And we don't know anything about the Denisovans. We literally have a couple bones that we're working from, like a pinky bone and a couple other pieces, I think. So we don't know if they could talk. And you kind of need speech to organise for civilization. Yeah. At least we do it verbally. I mean, Graham Hancock might argue that maybe some of their methods of communications might have been some other mechanism. So it just, again, in speculation, I don't rule out, when you consider the concept of a lost ancient civilization, I'm not saying aliens, but I think it could certainly have involved other types of humans. We've got all the elongated skulls as well in South America. That's a real interesting phenomena. Graham would I've heard him talk about the fact that some of those people that they may have had other faculties that created or achieved some of this stonework. I prefer.
What did you say about that?
Well, I mean, he gets attacked for this endlessly, but he says that it's possible that they achieved some of the things they did through other mental faculties, not just telepathy, but telekinesis and stuff like that. I mean, there's stories that seem to go along those lines. I prefer to take the technological angle, just given that we have evidence for some of the tools and powerful tools being used and achievements being made, like these 1,000+ ton statues. I mean, God, I think I was telling you at dinner last night that, there's a quarry in Egypt that had they disconnected that one limestone block, it would have been 5,000 tons.
Right.
There's stuff up to that scale that seems like they were working on, and it's crazy that at the Minya quarry. But so I don't rule out the possibility for a lost ancient civilization that it could have involved other species of hominids. Like we're one. We're the last humans left. Right? There were other humans. We killed off the rest of them. We're the last humans left.
Are you aware of the evidence? I'm really fuzzy on this, but there's some sort of evidence that was found that basically says that our DNA or the telomere on our DNA, the telomeres have been like capped, or something happened where there's evidence that like a pre-civilization could have possibly had a lifespan that was like 10 times our lifespan or something.
Yeah, there's some really interesting.
It was like a very stark difference between our DNA and the DNA that was found in, what was it compared to? The DNA in what? I forget what it was.
Probably in chimps and
In chimps, yeah.
and other our closest relatives. Well, so there's I'm not 100% familiar with the telomere thing. I've heard that, but I've always been fascinated by the work of guys like Lloyd Pye.
Lloyd Pye, that's the guy. That's how I heard about this.
Yeah, so Lloyd Pye is interesting. He it's a great lecture online called "Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong." He was probably more well known for being the keeper of the Star Child skull, which is this interesting artifact. But he was genuinely interested also.
Star Child.
Oh, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Okay, all right. Let's keep going. Let's not get you off track.
It's interesting, but he was interested in human origins and human evolution as well. He wrote a book called "Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong," and I will say that he does do the whole Anunnaki thing. Like he does go down the route of what's his name, who wrote 10th Planet, Sitchin, Zachariah Sitchin. So he sort of follows that. But I mean, I don't think Sitchin is correct, and I'm not really a believer in the Anunnaki stuff. But
Oh, really?
no, I think Sitchin was kind of pretty comprehensively kind of debunked with how he translated his deliberate mistranslations, and it's a long story with Sitchin, but not to say that you can rule like that possibility isn't ruled out. The work that Lloyd Pye did made it interesting from a perspective of a potential intervention theory, which means that he was sort of hinting at the fact that we might have been genetically engineered as a species. And there's some evidence that, at least from he was looking at the evidence to support that. I think we have. I'm gonna get this wrong. We have a different number of chromosomes,
Right.
than other species, than our closest relatives.
Right.
And when you look at the DNA structures, it almost looks like we've been engineered, like they've been tied together and kind of engineered that way. There's a few genetic oddities about our species that Lloyd Pye was suggesting might be indications that we've been engineered. So it gets into that detail. I'm not an expert. It's been a long time since I've read the book.
And this flies in the face of evolution. Like
It does in a lot of ways, but there are sort of other examples. I don't know if it's horses or something like that that have a similar chromosomal difference. It's not the only thing he points at. Like we're a weird kind of species with some of the diseases that we have. I mean, he talks about the fact that we're like one of the only species that dies of exposure. Like it's like we're not well engineered for the planet.
Right.
You ever seen a dog just looks at the sun? Like its eyeballs, they're just looking at the sun. Like, don't look at the nuclear explosion, you'll go blind. No, they're fine. We go blind if we look at the sun. We don't have very good night vision. We die from exposure if we're left out, without clothing and shelter and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of really weird genetic diseases that other species don't seem to suffer from. I mean, there's even some deficiencies in our genome that
We're so far away from every other wild animal. It's insane.
it is. Well, and that's always been true. I mean, the missing gap idea is you'd actually need like a dozen missing links, or the missing link. You know, the idea that there's a missing link in the chain of evolution to get to humans, and like you need more than one. Like to go from our nearest ancestors and Neanderthals to us is a huge jump. I mean, and it's actually, he points out that in a lot of cases that gets obfuscated by the way they lay out skeletons, like by making skeletons of Neanderthals look more humanoid in terms of, like, you know, they space out the neck and they don't show it like it was where they had no neck and their shoulders were kind of much closer to their head. There's huge genetic and evolution gaps between us and our nearest relatives. Not, you know, in a number of different areas. So he gets into that, and it's an interesting idea. Like I don't know. I don't know how to explain it one way or the other. I do rate the whole intervention theory as a possibility. So either the OG intervention theory, which is life itself, panspermia, like DNA itself coming to this world by intervention, or by just panspermia as an accident. Like comets could well be the progenitors of life in the universe. Like the fact we're learning more and more about the fact that there's, you know, the amino acids and the building blocks of life could be contained in cometary material, in those icy cores, or even if they're radioactive, they could be liquid cores. Liquid water could be carried by these things, which could contain the building blocks of life. And it's really interesting to think that, you know, this is the mystery that's at the origin of life altogether. And, you know, we're definitely creatures of this planet too, I'd say that. Like we trace our DNA, we're part of the tree of life of this planet. But it's the one, as far as evolution's gone, from single cell organisms through the dinosaurs to us, the one part of that that's never kind of changed, that's never evolved, is DNA itself. So the way that life gets expressed as a technology, the DNA, that's never really changed. Like DNA as a technology has not changed. It's changed its expression. Like it's the forms and the life that it creates has changed. And there's a real mystery at the point of origin of life, like how DNA came to be. You know, this is an ongoing field of research. There are people trying to figure this out. Can you know, I mean, I personally think it's quite unlikely that it was a bunch of, you know, proteins and amino acids and some warm water that got hit by lightning and boom, there's DNA. It's a very complex structure.
Yes.
And even by saying that, oh, okay, so life might have been seeded on this planet, either like Prometheus style, where the aliens came and said, sprinkled some DNA in the river and away we go, or it just arrived on a planet from somewhere else. All you're really doing is kicking the can down the road. Like it still had to start somewhere. But it's a possibility. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if panspermia was the origin of life on this planet. Could have been another civilization. I don't know. And I think there's some interesting lines of evidence and interesting thinking from people about the idea that it could have been a more direct intervention into evolution later on in time. Now, I'm not saying I believe that. I just think it's interesting, and it's tough to rule out some of those possibilities based on that.
Especially when you look at some of the stuff that we're looking at here and the stuff that you've discovered.
Oh.
I mean, I think with beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have proved that you and people like you have proved that we're not coming from off of a linear timeline.
No,
of,
I would agree.
at least technologically.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's see if I can show this to you. It's hard to see. I wish I had these photos. Maybe I can pull up a video or something. But
Which one? So is this? Have you looked at that new 5 million or 5,000 ton obelisk? Is that?
no. If you want to see that, I do have a picture of that. I would just say that I would finish off the quarry discussion by saying that with the scoop marks, the one other thing I'd just like to point out to people is that, you know, these are regular lines. You actually see it here. I think it's not a bad example. They start, like these scoop marks start and they're consistent and linear, and they go all the way down, and they actually go up and underneath this stone. So this stone's being quarried out, the one in the foreground here. And they go all the way up and under. So it's like this one continuous tool mark. I have a long video on the scoop marks that gets into the details of why this isn't the pounding stone hypothesis isn't a plausible example. And I think it's telling also that if you look at the quarrying methods that they will show you in the quarry, okay, there's pounding stones, which is literally with a stone or rubbing on it with a stone. And then you go up in sophistication to the wedge and chisel approach that I talked about, where you're hammering wood into, like you make these grooves and you hammer wood in. And then the other example is, well, you actually have straight chiseling, where it's later in time and you've got hardened steel, you've got long steel chisels and you're banging it in and you're just like carving the rock and then splitting it.
Yeah.
So you can think of that as a sophistication goes up. But what they're extracting and the stones that they're taking out is the absolute opposite. They're using those other methods to take smaller pieces and little pieces off the sides of things. But the pounding stone method, the most primitive one, is also the one supposedly responsible for the biggest goddamn pieces you can find. Like it doesn't make any sense that the most primitive technology is the one supposedly responsible for the 1,000-ton artifacts. And there's there's a good example of how old that is. If I go back up to my podcast images, we go back to the quarry, is in this area here, right? So this is what's known as the harbour in the quarry. You can't normally get in here. I don't know. One time we wandered down here and we were in here, and so supposedly this is where they would park the boats, and they call this the harbour. And it's not a harbour. To me, what you're looking at is the remnants of a trench for a giant object, right? So look at this thing. So this is a piece of stone that was probably extracted from here. You see the scoop marks along the side. I think it's as big, if not bigger, than the unfinished obelisk. And it's in this lower area. I'm standing there, and it's called the harbour now. But I think you're looking at what is left after they've taken something out using this scooping technique. What's interesting about it is that it's got painting. It's got all these depictions of ostriches, or some people say they're flamingos, and there's all this painting on it. And what gets even more interesting about that stuff is when you look at this style of this artwork that's on this area. You see it keeps going down here, and all of these walls are gone. The closer wall to us has been quarried out entirely, but this was a big trench, and this huge piece of stone was removed. That type of artwork, and I've got many more examples than just this, it matches this stuff. Now this stuff is a style of painting and artwork that is very much associated with pre-dynastic times, right? So like before the dynastic civilization ever started, the artwork that's on the wall in that quarry matches the pottery and diagrams and drawings that we see on pottery vessels that come from pre-dynastic times, that have been found in pre-dynastic burials. So what this infers to me is that artwork done in that quarry was probably done in pre-dynastic times. It was done using the same art style. They used a much different art style. There's other carvings in the quarry where the Egyptians did their thing, you know, the more dynastic, typical kind of hieroglyphic and artwork. This red ochre paint with the style of carving, these birds on this thing match the birds in that. There's a bunch of other examples of it. It means that it was done in pre-dynastic times, which also tells you that it was done on the wall that was left after they'd pulled that block out. So you had to have pulled that block out first to even expose that wall,
right,
and then it gets painted on. So how long ago did they pull that block out of there? And yeah, it's crazy. So I just wanted to make that point about the quarry.
Yeah.
And I do have a video that dives into that giant block that's been extracted there and the connection to the artwork.
Let's talk about the vases. There's a lot of new shit going on with the vases that you've been looking at.
There is.
We talked a lot about the vases on the first podcast we did, and the incredible symmetry involved in making those vases, and the fact that they're extremely thin. You can shine a light in them, you can see through them. They're so goddamn thin, and they're made out of some of the hardest rocks on Earth. And they still say that these vases were made during those times with chisels and pounding stones and all that stuff, right?
Yeah,
even after you come out with some of your videos and some of this stuff, no one's acknowledged it officially.
Right. Yeah. I mean, nobody's looked at nobody's really said that. That there's. I mean, the hypothesis for how they were made, at least in the mainstream, has remained the same, which is, it was people rubbing on them with rocks, banging on them with flint, stuff like that. So made by hand. And again, to speed run the vases, it's like they go back to well and truly pre-dynastic times. In some cases, there's evidence of them going back to burials as far as 14,500 years ago. Right through pre-dynastic times, and then they've been found in times, basically during the Old Kingdom, up to about the 4th and 5th dynasty, most of them. The majority of them were found beneath the step pyramid, like 40,000, 50,000 of them. which is a third dynasty structure. Then they kind of peter out after that. Like there's a few examples of vases that come from later periods, but we identify them as coming from those periods because they have very poorly scratched hieroglyphs on them. So, I mean, we talked about that earlier. But these are incredible class and, you know, category of artifacts, like made from all sorts of exotic types of stone. Like you said, we talked about them before. Perfect symmetry, extremely thin. Petrie found one that went down to 1/40th of an inch, which is I think the quote that I've got here from him. One of the other things I always like to point out is that they're often found. We talked about imitation earlier.
Painting them.
This is where you would find them, and they're ascribed to the same person because they're found in the same burial. But you have a hardstone vase here next to a hand-formed pottery vase that is painted to look like granite, and not even this is not a turned vase. This is hand-formed.
Right.
So you know, a lot of people, even when you get into the details of arguing about this, the people are like, okay, they made them on a lathe, but it was just a simple lathe. Because you know, the idea that you're turning the stone to get these results.
Right.
I'm like, okay, so if they had lathes, why didn't they have the pottery wheel? The pottery wheel was a much simpler application of the wheel than a lathe is. But it's just a facetious sort of argument to suggest that these came from the same people. I think they're inherited and they're older. But what's happened, and there's lots of evidence, they go way back into time, lots of them discovered, they were inscribed. They were definitely reused and inherited. You know, there's a depiction of how they were made that was found at Saqqara. This is what they used to basically say, this is how they were made. It's basically like bent sticks with weights on the side and flint tips.
This guy's got his hand in the middle of it.
Yeah, he's rubbing at it with a hand. But what they're showing you here is the vase making industry that happened after the third dynasty.
Right.
It's the alabaster vases. It's just white calcite. It's a 3 on the Mohs scale. It's much softer, and we have lots and lots of examples of beautiful.
Okay, everybody, here we go. It's me, Gregory Manarino, Thursday, October 12th, 2023. Let's cut right to it, all right? Today, this market experienced what I would say is a pan sell-off, a fear trade, and some very, very interesting action here in the debt market. You know, I almost don't know where to start. So let's do this. A pretty profound knee-jerk into the dollar today on a relative strength basis. The dollar put on like 0.75%. That's a fear trade. Okay. Now, generally, and we, you know, look, all of you know how this works, but let's just review a slight bit here. Generally, and we witnessed this with this whole war. Fear in the market tends to drive cash into the perceived safety of debt. And that was really what this is all about, a big part of it. We watched bond yields drop, risk drop, cash make its way into the stock market. It looked like everything was beautiful. Okay, now we here, right on this blog, discussed how it's not going to last. That's number one. Number two, in order to push more cash into the debt market and stabilize it, they need something else, something bigger, something maybe much bigger. Now, it looks to me, gauging from the fear trade here, I mean, we had a pan sell-off, like I said. Albert R., thank you. We had stocks sell off today, debt sold off today, cryptocurrency sold off today, gold and silver sold off today, crude oil under a little bit of pressure, but again, knee-jerk into the dollar. It's fear trade for the most part, except the bond market. Now, a few things could be going on here. Number one is the market may be preparing itself or sensing something very big is about to happen. Now, what could possibly, look, I'm just speculating here, okay? We all know, I mean, it's pretty much common knowledge now. There is going to be an all-out incursion here on Gaza. A lot of people are going to die, okay? That may be it, but I think that's probably baked in to what the market is seeing or thinking is going to happen. So it could be something else. Could be something else. The market could be overreacting as well. I mean, you know, look, this war over there, is expanding on all fronts, and it's a human tragedy on so many levels here. But again, they will kill as many people as they have to, spread blood and guts and hopes and dreams and everything all over the place to maintain the current system. All right. And you're watching TV today and the propaganda and the new war on terror. You know, they're not calling it that, but of course that's where we're building up towards. Anyway, so this pan sell-off today, I mean, the market was down a lot worse earlier. We did finish lower. Nothing dramatic across the board, but everything sold off. Everything sold off. Got that knee-jerk into the dollar. Now, this debt market issue, we knew it wasn't going to last. I'm very surprised it hasn't lasted a little bit longer, unless there's something else going on here. All right, so we really do need to raise our awareness, pay attention to what's going on around us, and I think that we have a very, very good handle on it, you and I. All right, we've been ready for anything for the longest freaking time. Anyway, so with that, I want to discuss a few other things with you. So, I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be laughing. I really shouldn't here. So inflation, of course, the news today, a couple of big things came in worse than expected. Nobody saw this coming. None of the rocket scientists, economists saw this coming. And you know, I want you to understand something. I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to say it again and again. And I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think, I'm going to pose this as a question or something. How is it? Thank you, Robert. Explain to me, and put this into very simple terms, as if I were a small child or a golden retriever. All right. How is it that so far every single projection from the Federal Reserve has been wrong? Janet Yellen as well, former Fed chair. You think there's something going on here? Not once have they gotten it right. And they're all shocked and surprised when they find out that, well, inflation is continuing to rise. But so they've been 100% wrong. But you and I have nailed it to the wall. How is that even possible? Explain it to me, unless, of course, this is deliberate. Okay, it's the same story. This institution, a crime syndicate of, I mean, if there were the highest order and then something beyond the highest order, well, that's the Federal Reserve, and that's central banks collectively. Okay, and there's no accountability. There's no. Again, this is all about the war. You don't even hear about Russia, Ukraine anymore. It's all about this. Politicians, nobody calling out the Federal Reserve. Nothing. No one holds anybody to account anymore. It's an incredible thing. Now, a couple of other things I want to talk about today. So, I mean, are you surprised about what you're about to hear? So, mortgage defaults are rising at their fastest pace since the last housing meltdown. I don't think anyone's surprised here. Now, it's not just, it's loans across the board. Loans across the board are in default faster than we've ever seen. As a matter of fact, this plays right into something else that we found out today. The cost of living right now is higher than it has ever been in history. But remember Janet Yellen? She said, everything is fine. I don't see a damn thing wrong. She didn't put in those words, but she said everything's fine. Economy's strong. We're doing fantastic. Everyone's rich. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that too. Anyway, it's just, you know, it's loan defaults are skyrocketing. This is all the stuff I was writing down today. And this plays into something else that you and I know is going on. Raiden 57, thank you. Look, these numbers, all of them, they're not real. There's nothing. They're all fabrications, and they let us know what they want us to know, or they think we should be allowed to know. Again, the information is controlled. The numbers are fake. I hate even talking about it. I despise it because they're not real. There's no bearing on reality at all anymore. And this is exactly what you would expect to see as things are collapsing around us all. They can't allow you to know. But anyway, going back to what I was saying. So we understand, and we've covered this at length, I don't even want to cover it anymore, that the banks are in dire shape. Dire shape here. Their balance sheets, the value of their balance sheets, they've loaded up on debt. In this raising rising rate environment. Their portfolios are evaporating. Bad loans across the board, and you and I are going to pay for it all again, and we're paying for it now. And again, with the big shock of inflation continuing to rise with no end in sight. Again, there's no end in sight. Not only is there no end in sight, everything they're doing here is assuring that inflation is going to go much, 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 much higher. Again, you can't throw trillions of dollars, let's say $8 trillion so far at the war on terror, which is now entering a new phase. Another at least $8 trillion going at that. Billions and hundreds of billions to fight this war. The pledge from everyone that you can dream about and think about to fund this new war, which is going to expand. This is massively inflationary. Massively inflationary. It's going to take a while for that cash, the debt, to make its way through the system, but it's coming. And don't take my word for it. Listen to the BIS screwballs over there, who are telling us it's like we need to know this. Of course we know it's going to happen. It's unbelievable. But today's action in the market. Today's the first day since the war where we witnessed a rebound here, or a sell-off again in the debt market, and that obviously hit the stock market. Although it could have been a lot worse. Earlier the Dow was down like 350. We finished down, but not by that much anyway. But it was a pan sell-off with a knee-jerk into the dollar. That is generally a fair trade, except it was lacking one thing: the cash making its way into the debt market. So we need to. We'll see. We'll see where this goes. Again, it could be the market is fearing the next phase, which they're broadcasting to the world already, which is this incursion into Gaza. We took out 2 airports today. Israel took out 2 airports today in Syria and Lebanon over there. They're shelling. So, I mean, this is a multi-front war. It's getting a lot worse. The backlash against this war is growing. And it's pretty incredible thing. Anyway, people, that's what's happening. That's where we are. And look, let me say this too. Despite the fact that inflation continues to rise and will continue to do so, and it's not unexpected. The only way it's unexpected is if you're a mental midget of the highest order, or you're a liar of the highest order. You pick. And I don't think the people at the Fed are actually mental midgets. I don't even think they're freaking human beings. You know what I'm saying here. Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate this. Yes, MRNC. It's building up to something like that. A false flag, another one, something bigger. Again, just understanding how the market works and realizing that the market prices things in. I don't think that what the market is feeling right now is this Israeli incursion into Gaza, which is being leveled. It's a terrible thing that's going on over there. Okay. Anyway, it's something else. It's something else, and I think we all feel it. I know we feel. Look, I don't live my life on some other plane or whatever it might be, but I'm telling you, you trust your instincts. You're going to be right most of the time. And, this doesn't feel right to me. Also, let me say this as well. What happens in one part of the world affects all of us, okay? That's really the truth. And that may be some of what we are
Kelly
all
Cake's
experiencing
legend. How's it
as
going?
well.
Hope you're doing well.
This whole thing it's much
Congrats on
bigger
your partner
than I think that most people
achievement.
understand.
I saw
But
that
I think
recently.
we're all on the
That's
same
awesome.
page here.
How you doing?
I know
Thanks for
Lava
being here.
gets it,
That's-
Geo Rider, Magic Mika. Thank you again for all
has
those
been
things you
a
sent.
big supporter of my
Unbelievable,
stream for years. Sorry,
Fantastic.
it's really loud.
Perry gets it. Joey Socks. Everybody, look at all my friends here. All right, people, let's
Toad has been a big supporter of my stream for like years and years. He helped me get affiliate and shit.
and a lot of you.
What's up, Kelly? Thanks for being here.
Look
How are you?
good, Ricky looks so green. And you're right. This stuff gets to me. It really does. It sucks out my freaking will.
people in here.
And, but I'm okay. All right. I'm not going to stop doing this. I said earlier, I sent out a newsletter. I said, if it kills me, I'm going to keep at this. Yeah, exactly.
I have cool people here, that's
well,
why I am.
Copo's in the shop right now.
And I'm also growing. I'm trying to achieve the Sun Gym physique.
I got to get a new setup.
He goes hard though. He goes harder than
And
I
I
do.
will be back racing again. I think that's part of the reason why I feel the way that I do. Anyway, that's pretty much where we.
You are definitely cool.
Do you want to go over anything?
You are cool, Cat.
The floor is open.
I don't know if I have any more
Anything
VIPs.
you guys want to talk
I can probably make you a mod.
Rate hike. All right, Chet. Let's talk about that a little bit. I was trying to lead up to I got sidetracked, but that put me back on track. Thank you. All right, so here's what I believe is
That's pretty
what do
good.
we understand?
Sweet.
You know that central banks are going to continue.
All right,
to
let's do the
nothing
Sun
is
Gym.
your way. Thank you, Will.
His leg race is the way he does it, like chin up leg raise.
Well, I'm not too familiar with what that may be, honestly. But anyway, let me get back on track real quick. So we understand that untold amounts of cash are going to be thrown at this new war on terror, and they're playing it up with, you had they're telling us about babies getting their heads cut off and all this, all this stuff that they think people need to hear to support it without any real evidence. Okay, that's one thing. But anyway, that's just how they play this game. It appears to me that central banks are going to use this crisis to their own benefit, quite obviously. And that is, they're going to look for another, they're more than likely, I would say, gauging from what we've heard, thank you, Will, from a couple of Fed presidents.
Well, thanks for being here, Kelly.
They're going to use this opportunity, central banks, the Federal Reserve, more than anybody else, to print, to now enter another phase of debt creation and cash creation out of nothing, sucking the purchasing power out of the currencies. You know this already. I'm preaching to the choir, but that's what they're going to do. And you and I are going to pay for it in the sense that inflation is going to continue to skyrocket. The economy is going to continue to free fall. The cost of living today, which is the highest it's ever been in history here in the United States and more than likely everywhere around the world, is going to get a lot worse. It's pretty obvious what they want to do, and I'm not lying. They want most of us dead, and I mean that in the literal sense. It's about control. It's about power. I really feel that way, and it's well on its way. I mean, and these numbers of dead that they're throwing out here, in Gaza, they're 10 times worse. 10 times worse than they're letting us know about. Anyway, that's where we stand, people. I think again that we're on the right side of this. We're prepared in every way we can be. We got each other's backs, and unfortunately, this thing is spiraling out of control. Although it's in control, everything you're seeing has been planned out from a long time ago. This is not a spontaneous thing. This wasn't an intelligence failure like they were trying to sell us. Now there's proof that it was not an intelligence failure. There were multiple warnings from multiple nations about this. But that's how they initially tried to sell it to us. And some people, bought it. That it's absolutely not true. There's no way. And again, there's other stuff that's been planned here, and it's going to happen. And again, going back to this market here, I don't like it. I don't like the way. I'm a pretty good reader of this. All right, I'm not right all the time, but I'm telling you, I don't think it's this incursion that the market is fearing. It's something else. And I guess we're going to find out soon enough. Seriously. All right, people. This guy here loves you a lot from the heart. Thank you. Over 800 thumbs up. I can't thank you enough for that. Please comment. Please share this video. And we will resume these festivities tomorrow in the morning. Just be ready for anything, people. Be ready for anything. All right, I'll leave you up with that.
alabaster vase work. But it's very simple. It's not simple. It's artful. It's not precise. You don't see the same symmetry. They're off balance. They don't, they don't have the same properties as the very hard stone vases that seem to come from earlier times. So what's happened though since I talked to you last was that we've finally been able to take this analysis to a new level. Like we've finally been able to get our hands on what is a privately owned pre-dynastic rose granite vase and subject it to structured light scanning. This was the first step we've taken. This happened at the start of this year of 23, and we've since come a long way since then. And structured light scanning is a process where you're basically 3D scanning it with lasers, and you can basically create a model of the artifact down to about the accuracy of about 1,000th of an inch. So take an inch, divide it up into 1,000 pieces. A human hair is between 2 and 3 thousandths of an inch thick. A sheet of printer paper, maybe 5 or 6, something like that, thousandths thick. So where accuracy is down to less than half the width of a human hair. So it creates an extremely accurate model.
Toad, you just know everything in this world, don't you? How are you so knowledgeable, man?
You can start to look at, okay, how precisely was this thing made? And that's exactly what we did. So this is the vase. It's actually only about yay tall. It's like 6 inches tall, maybe. A little tiny thing. And that's it being scanned. And once we did that, there were a couple of professional metrologists, and these guys work in the aerospace industry. They make parts for jet engines and turbines and space rocket ship stuff. These are professional engineers that they're professional metrologists, and metrology being the study of the science of measurement. So in those fields, you have to you use these techniques a lot in those fields, and it's very important, right? We want to make things precisely. This is a good example of precision enabling function. It's like turbine blade manufacture and stuff like that, like efficiency of jet engines, all that sort of stuff. These guys work for one of those companies, and this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. So they analyzed the scan and they ran it through a coordinate measurement system, and what they found was just astonishing. Like the results and looking at just how precisely this thing was made, absolutely astonishing. And in particular, it's not just the precise nature of the surfaces themselves, but it's the interrelation of one surface to another. So, making the different parts of the vase be perpendicular or parallel or perfectly aligned with other parts of it. So the way this works, it's fairly complex, but we can sort of step through it. The first thing to know is the vase itself is an ellipsoid. You can't match it to a regular geometric shape. Right? It's not a circle, it's not a sphere, it's not a cone, it's an ellipsoid. And what you want to be able to do is match geometric shapes or regular shapes to parts of the vase, so that then you can do geometry on them. You can calculate center lines and center points and the how perpendicular or parallel are they to other parts of the vase. So things like this. So we essentially start by creating an XYZ three-dimensional grid, which helps us derive things like center lines, axes. And then we can start to compare the other parts of the vase. So the way you do this in a CMM system is you match geometric shapes to parts of the vase. Now, you could do that with you could say like, all right, we're going to match a flat plane to the top of the vase, the lid, and we're going to use 5 points to do it. It's not going to be very accurate. It's not going to represent that surface very well. But if you do it with thousands and thousands of points, the more points you use of reference, the more accurately it's representing that surface. So you'll see in these slides the fact that we're using thousands and thousands of points. So in this example, there's nearly 4,000 points of reference has been used to match a flat plane to the top of to the vase lip, to the top surface. And then the measurement we're doing is like how close to perfectly flat is this? It's within 3,000th of an inch. So it's very flat. Like that the flatness of that surface is within 3,000ths of an inch of being perfectly flat, basically. So very close, very accurate.
Around the width of a piece of hair.
Yeah. That's just the top. So then you can go further from that. Now we can look at, all right, let's look at the vase mouth. So this is that round part on the inside of the neck of the vase, if you like. And so what we're doing here is we're measuring it with a cylinder. So you can see that on the left of the vase mouth there, there's a little cylinder icon, and we're using like 10,500 points to match it, which is a lot. I mean, this actually has got some damage on the inside of the neck too, this vase. And we can match it looking at the cylindricity, so how perfectly cylindrical is that? It's within 13 thousandths of an inch of being cylindrical. But now that this is on I'll speed up a bit on this, because now that we've got that top surface, you can think of that as like an x-axis. And if you think of a cylinder sitting in the neck of this vase, we can now, because we've matched the cylinder to the surface, we can say, okay, how perpendicular is that cylinder to the top surface that we just managed? And we call that, like, the top surface is control surface A. Right? So you can see like the perpendicular measurement, how perpendicular is it to control surface A, and it's within 1/1000th of an inch.
1,000.
Yes, so it's basically perfectly perpendicular to the top surface. Now, top surface is A, and now we've got this vase neck, this cylinder in the vase neck, and the center line of that vase neck. We can call that the axis of the vase, and we can call that control surface B. So now we can measure every other part of the vase relative to the top and the neck, and that's what we do. So we go on to measure, like, all right, you can match a sphere to the lower part of the vase body. And we did that using like nearly 80,000 points of reference, so it's really accurate. And then what you can do is you can, with that sphere, this is worth talking about for a minute. This is the highest number we saw in the whole report. It's 17 thousandths of an inch. So the center point of that sphere is basically within 17 thousandths of an inch from the center line of the vase. So it's like a couple sheets of printer paper basically away from it. Now, it seems like a big number relative to the other numbers, but what this is telling you a lot more than just like how close is that center line of the sphere. What spheres are interesting, like if you took a sphere and you deformed it at all, like small on the bottom, or you pushed or whatever, it's going to shift that center point dramatically, right? So what this is telling you is not only is this 17 thousandths is no joke, like that's extremely close. The exact center point of that sphere is really close to that center line of the vase. But it's also telling you just how regular that shape is. Because if it wasn't regular, and that part of the vase that matches the sphere, if that was at all deformed, it would shift that center point all over the place. So it's telling you that it's not only is this very close to the center line, extremely close, it's almost perfectly spherical in this section. So it's a section of a sphere, that blue line, right? That's the matching of a sphere. It's very, very regular. It's regular to the point where you couldn't possibly achieve it with hand tools, by hand or by eye. Like, because you imagine you're carving on that. And again, they don't credit the Old Kingdom, or certainly not pre-dynastic times, with the use of the lathe. But even if they had a lathe, and even if you're using like a tool rest and you're trying to do this by hand, you're going to be a million miles away from this result. This is genuinely not achievable by hand. This incredibly regular shape. It's a phenomenal achievement, and even though that's the biggest number you see in this report, this represents something that would require some of the very best machinery we have today to replicate, even in other materials like acrylic or stainless steel or aluminium. And this is in rose granite, which isn't a regular material, right? The hardness changes microscopically as it goes through the material. We get other results with same things. We're matching a cone at this point to the vase bottom, and this is the other end of the vase from the top and the center line, and we're within 5/1000ths of an inch of being perfectly perpendicular with the top. We're within 9/1000ths of an inch of being perfectly parallel with the center line, using 60,000 points of reference. Like, this is, it's infinitesimal. It's so ridiculously well made. It's not is what we're seeing, right? So. It gets interesting here even with the lug handles, and this gets into some of the details around how this might have been made, because you can imagine like turning this on a lathe, you can't really do the lug handles, right? Right, exactly. If this thing had lugs on it and you were spinning it this way, you can't, and you're cutting it as it's spinning, you can't really create the lug handles.
Yeah. They add those after in modern.
Well, yeah, you'd have to. Well, these aren't added;
they're a part of one piece.
They're part of one.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you'd probably have to leave a bull nose and come back with a different procedure to make them. But we can do things like compare the match a cylinder to the lug handles, compare them to A and B, which we're doing here, and we're within 1/1000th of an inch, like 1 3/1000ths of an inch. So incredibly accurate relative to these axes of measurement that we're taking. And then we can compare them to each other. We can create, like, all right, we can make one of these called reference surface F, and we can measure the other lug handle relative to it, and again we're within, you know, 5 or 6 or I think it's 7 thousandths of an inch of being perfectly aligned. What is it? Parallel with the other lug handle. Not only that, but it's like the tops of them. Like there's actually a video of us spinning this thing on a surface and having like like one of these precision tolerance gauges that measures in the thousandths of an inch, and you sort of zero it out on one lug handle, and you spin it around, and it just zeroes out on top of the other lug handle. Like they're perfectly the same height on the thing, and that also speaks to the flatness of the bottom, because it's turning relative to the flatness of the bottom of the base, which we didn't measure, but that's the fact that you're zeroing out this gauge. It's in some of the videos. It's manufacturers and it's hard to explain. Machinists and people that understand these sort of measurements will understand it better, and they'll get it. But it's interesting to think, all right, so assuming you've left a bull nose, right, to create these lug handles, and you have to come back with a different tool, and you've got to carve away that area of the vase body between the lug handles. So what about that part of the vase? Because they can't be made on a lathe. It has to be made with a different process, right? And so we looked at that. We looked at the actual area of the vase between the two handles, and we found the same level of precision. And this is truly remarkable. It's 20,000 points of reference. We looked at, we matched a cone to look at how close is the center line to the center line of B, like that center line of the neck of the vase is within 5 thousandths of an inch. This is really remarkable because in today's manufacturing processes, when you change tools or you change the process, it introduces errors. Like this is accounted for in our modern manufacturing processes, things like making turbine blades and stuff like that. We understand that tools and process changes introduces errors, and we don't see that sort of error here. We're not seeing. So it leads you to one or two conclusions. One,
in case no one has noticed, the U.S. national debt has risen by $444 billion in the past 2 weeks. At that pace, the U.S. will be adding $11 trillion per year to the national debt. Clearly, something is wrong. A sovereign debt and a U.S. dollar crisis cannot be too far away. Peter now joins us once again and again. Do not shoot the messenger. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be the bearer of good news once again. And he's shaking his head. Peter, you know we love you because you're one hell of a smart guy. But every time you come on the program, I start getting really pissed off about what's happening in this country and what's happening to my tax dollars and the American tax dollars. So I know you probably don't have good news. So my first question is, the big fight at Capitol Hill was all over the speaker, but let's be real, it wasn't about the speaker. It was about the national debt and the spending. And those two things are adding to the inflation, along with now we've got massive walkouts, whether it's the car manufacturers or Kaiser Permanente, the health workers. We've got all these strikes. I don't foresee any silver lining in the future, but you're the expert. Fill us in.
No, it's all clouds. Unfortunately, they're rain clouds. But yeah, the problem has been over a decade of reckless spending financed by debt on the part of not only just the federal government, but look at all the state, municipal governments, corporate America, households. Everybody has gorged themselves on this debt fest that was served by the Federal Reserve. Interest rates were held artificially low for the better part of a decade, and as a result, we have accumulated trillions and trillions in debt that can never be repaid. The only thing we were able to do was pay the interest because it was practically zero. Well, now it's not zero anymore. The prime rate is at 8.5%. So many people are paying more than 10% to borrow money. Long-term treasuries are almost at 5%. They haven't yielded that much in over 15 years, but they're going a lot higher. We're still early in this journey back to normal rates, and in fact, we're not going to have normal rates. We're going to actually have higher than normal rates, but the problem is we can't handle it because we have much higher than normal debt.
And then I believe last time, or maybe 2 times ago, I can't remember, with when you come on and talk all this bad stuff about our economy, but I think it's important for people to note, I believe you had told us we are at a all-time high when it comes to Americans' credit card debt and an all-time low for family savings. I hate to add insult to injury, but I mean, that just goes to show what Bidenomics is doing to the American household. Are those facts right?
Sure, we have low savings and high debt, and the debt keeps growing. I mean, obviously, the Fed's inflation fight isn't working because it's not resulting in more savings. It's just resulting in more spending. The problem is people are spending more but buying less because the extra spending is a function of higher prices. It's not because Americans are buying more, they're paying more. Yes. Everybody is paying more. That's Biden inflation tax.
Yes, thank you. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because we found a video I wanted to show the other day, but I held it for you and your appearance because you and I talked so much about inflation and the numbers over the last 2.5 years of the Biden regime have been lied about. First it was inflation's around 6 or 7. They never said it was, I think, over double digits. You and I agreed it was well over 10, 11, 12, 14, whatever. I want you to watch this video. This is a regular American walking through Costco, showing you what prices are today. And he had taken pictures a year ago, October, to show you how much a bag of flour, this, that, whatever, has gone up. I'm sorry, this ain't no 10, 20% increase. Watch this, Peter.
So I'm walking around Costco here, and I'm noticing these prices. For example, these mattress rentals, $15.99. I bought those a year ago for $6.99. I keep getting told that we got, 6, 7% inflation. You gotta be kidding me. Let's look at what else we got going on here. We literally bought this chicken broth, $5.69, 2 months ago. Dang, this is the flour we were buying for $5.99 last year.
Now, some of those were $2 to $3 more over the last few weeks or year, but a majority of them were double. The flour, he had a pick, $5.99, it went to 12 something. This is not 10, 12%. I mean, and by the way, we're at $7 now in Southern California, a gallon of fuel.
Yeah, no, those photos don't lie. It's just the CPI that lies. And I did a study myself. This goes back to 2013. I didn't believe the CPI back then. And so I did a little study because it showed that over a 10-year period, according to the CPI, the price of newspapers and magazines rose by 30%. So I went back and I looked at photos on the internet of about 20 newspapers and magazines, the most highly circulated in the U.S., and I compared the prices that were written on the covers 10 years earlier to the prices that were on the covers in 2013. And the increase was not 30% like the CPI claimed, but 130%.
Right.
What happened to the extra 100%? Well, obviously, it got lost in the sauce of the CPI. So the government is not honest about inflation. That's one of the main reasons that Biden is so unpopular. You have all these journalists scratching their heads trying to figure out why the president's popularity is so low because they think the economy is so great. The reason his popularity is so low is because the economy stinks. It's because inflation is so much higher than the CPI reflects. That's why people are struggling. That's why so many people have second and third jobs.
Yeah.
Because they can't make ends meet with their first job because the cost of living has gone up so much.
You're damn right. And you know what? These journalists, you gotta watch what you call them. I call them activists. The ones that are preaching Joe Biden as our savior, they're activists. They don't get it because they're in a bubble. They work at CNN or ABC or whatever. They've got their big 6-figure salary. They're living in New York or DC. They're only rubbing elbows with the political elite, mostly on the left. And so to them, oh, it's a little bit of increase, but you make enough money to cover it. They don't worry about it. That's not 99% of the rest of America who is struggling when the flour goes from $5 to $12, when the gas goes from $2 to $7. We're pinched.
Well, the rich are going to be worried now that their assets are falling. Their stock prices, bond prices, and so they're going to start to feel the pain. They don't feel it at the supermarket, but they're going to feel it at the stock market. They're going to feel it in the bond market.
Yeah. Peter, do you think when Biden announced the extra $9 billion for student loan debt buyout, forgiveness program, whatever you call it, I call it election tampering, because that's what he's doing. He's trying to influence millions of people that he just paid off their loan with to vote for him. That obviously is going to, I would think, scare investors off. There is more debt that the federal government's accruing, so that means more inflation when you spend more of our money, right?
Well, of course, because if the government is not going to get back the student loans, where's the money going to come from?
Right.
It's come from inflation. The government's going to have to create more money to bail out people who took out student loans, and that means everybody else is going to foot the bill in terms of higher prices.
That's one of the most I mean, nobody ever calls us up from the federal government, Peter, and says, hey, can I pay your mortgage off for you, Peter? Let me make that car payment for you. You signed on the dotted line. You took the loan. You're supposed to pay for it in a capitalist system. But this regime, to buy votes, just, oh, don't worry about that college debt. Peter, I usually at the end ask you if there is a silver lining and any good news, but I think that's kind of a moot point tonight.
No, unfortunately, there's no good news. I mean, you can try to protect yourself. I mean, once you recognize the problem, even though you can't solve it or do anything about it, you can at least protect yourself, protect your families. You know, you can invest in the right things. You can buy gold and silver and get out of U.S. currency. You can buy quality assets around the world, dividend-paying foreign stocks to try to protect your wealth, because this inflation tax is going to get much, much higher in the coming years. And if you don't want to pay the tax, then you got to do whatever you can to avoid it as best you can by divesting of what's being taxed, which is your dollars. You know, your paycheck is going to be taxed, your savings, your investments, but to the extent that you can get some of that out of the U.S. dollar, you can at least avoid part of that inflation tax.
So folks, bottom line, get ready for a harsh economic winter. And I don't mean just this winter. It's going to last next spring, next summer. This is going to be here for a while. Right, Peter?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Peter Schiff, Chief Economist, founder of Schiff Gold, Global Strategy, as always. We appreciate your insight. We just hate the news. Take care, Peter.
Thanks for being here.
Yep.
Thanks for being here. Always, everybody, lurkers, cupcakes, King Nick, everybody, Moonraker. Oh my god. Baron, Badcock, everybody, thanks for being here. Alright, I'm gonna sign off. Let's raid somebody. Maybe. That was workout 180. No fucking way. Get the fuck out of here. Alright, what am I doing? See you later.